The woman they traded for cornmeal. They handed her over like livestock, 5 sacks of cornmeal, one broken rifle, and a woman nobody wanted anymore. Elara Vance stood in that dusty exchange point with her face carved by violence, waiting for whatever came next. She'd survived things that should have killed her. Now she belonged to strangers who didn't speak her language, didn't know her name, and probably didn't care about either. But when that massive warrior stepped forward and touched her hair, not to claim it, but to braid it, everything she thought she knew about surviving started to crack wide open. If you want to see how a woman traded for grain becomes the one thing nobody can break, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elara's story travels. The morning they sold Elara Vance, the sky looked like old bone. Pale, brittle, the kind of white that pressed down on your skull and made you wonder if weather could carry intent. She stood in the yard behind Mercer's trading post with her wrists bound in front of her, not because she'd run, but because Boone Carver liked the look of it, liked how it made her seem manageable. Merchandise. 5 sacks of cornmeal sat stacked against the post railing. Someone had leaned a rifle there too, its stock split down the middle and wrapped with wire that had probably snapped the first time anyone fired it. That was the price. That was what she'd been reduced to. Elara didn't look at the men haggling over her. She'd learned that lesson young. Eye contact invited conversation, and conversation with men like Boone never ended anywhere good. Instead, she watched the dust devils spinning in the yard, little tornadoes of nothing that lived for 30 seconds and disappeared like they'd never existed at all. She understood the feeling. She ain't much to look at, Boone was saying, his voice carrying that easy drawl he used when he wanted something. But she works hard enough, knows her place, don't talk back. That last part was almost true. Elara had stopped talking back around the same time she'd stopped believing words could change anything. The man Boone was negotiating with didn't respond. He was tall, taller than anyone Elara had ever seen, with skin the color of turned earth and hair that fell past his shoulders in sections wrapped with leather cord. He wore clothes that looked handmade, stitched from hide and cloth in patterns she didn't recognize. No hat, no gun that she could see. Just a knife strapped to his thigh and a stillness that made him seem like part of the landscape instead of standing in it. Behind him, 3 others waited. 2 men and a woman, all dressed similarly, all watching with faces that gave away nothing. They hadn't dismounted. Their horses stood quiet, ears forward, like they were listening to a conversation humans couldn't hear. Of course, there's the matter of her face, Boone continued, and Elara felt her jaw tighten. Got herself cut up some years back. Ain't pretty, but she keeps it covered, mostly, so it don't bother nobody who don't need to look at it. The tall man's eyes shifted to Elara then. Not quickly. Not with curiosity or disgust or pity or any of the things she'd learned to recognize. Just a slow, deliberate movement that landed on her like weight without pressure. She met his gaze. She shouldn't have. It broke her own rule. But something in the way he looked, or didn't look really, because his face remained completely neutral, made her want to be seen, just once, just as something other than damaged goods with a ruined face and a trade value somewhere between grain and a broken weapon. The scar ran from her left temple down across her cheekbone, through her upper lip, and ended at the corner of her jaw. It pulled her mouth slightly to one side, gave her a permanent half snarl that made people uncomfortable. She'd stopped trying to smile years ago. The bonnet she wore usually kept it mostly hidden, the brim pulled low, but Boone had made her push it back this morning. "Let 'em see what they're getting," he'd said. "Honesty in trade? That's what makes a deal stick." Honesty. From Boone Carver. The man who'd bought her from her own father for a barrel of whiskey and 3 months' worth of seed corn, then worked her like a mule for 2 years before deciding she was more valuable as barter than labor. The tall man said something in a language Elara didn't know. It sounded like stones rolling in a river, smooth and rough at once, with pauses that felt intentional. One of the mounted men responded, his voice lower, and they went back and forth for maybe a minute while Boone shifted his weight and spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Well," Boone said finally, "we got a deal or not? 'Cause I got other interested parties if—" The tall man raised one hand. Not sharply, just lifted it a few inches, palm out, and Boone's mouth snapped shut like he'd been slapped. Then the tall man walked toward Elara. She held her ground. She'd learned that too, Running just made things worse, made men chase, made them prove they could catch you. Better to stand still. Better to take whatever came and survive it. He stopped about 3 feet away. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought. Not fat big, but built like something that had grown wild instead of being raised. His face had lines around the eyes, scars on his knuckles, a nose that had been broken at least once. 40, maybe. Maybe older. Hard to tell with people who lived outside and worked with their hands. He studied her face. Not the way men usually did, with that mix of curiosity and revulsion that made her want to crawl out of her own skin. He looked at the scar the way someone might look at a map, tracing its path, understanding its geography. Then he reached up. Alara flinched, couldn't help it. Her body knew what hands meant before her brain could catch up. But he didn't strike her. His fingers, rough, calloused, surprisingly warm, touched the edge of her bonnet and gently pushed it back further, fully exposing the scar. She wanted to jerk away, wanted to cover her face, wanted to disappear into the dust devils and spin away into nothing. She didn't move. He looked at her for another long moment, then turned back to Boone. "Deal," he said. His voice sounded like it came from somewhere deep underground. English, but shaped differently. Like he'd learned it from someone who'd learned it from someone else, and the pronunciation had weathered along the way. Boone grinned. "Smart man. She'll serve you well enough, long as you—" "No papers." The tall man cut him off. "No marks. She comes free." "Well now, I mean, you can do what you want with her once she's yours, but the binding document just says that. No papers." Boone's grin faltered. "Carver family's got rights to—" "Not anymore." The way he said it wasn't a threat, wasn't even aggressive, just a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of certainty that made argument seem pointless. Boone looked at the 4 mounted riders, then back at the tall man, then at the cornmeal and rifle. His tongue worked at something stuck in his teeth. "Fine," he said finally. "No papers, but the goods stay at the post till sunset. That's policy. I ain't handing over trade supplies till I know you ain't gonna just ride off with both." The tall man nodded once. Then he turned to Alara and held out his hand. She stared at it. Rough palm, split knuckles, nails that looked like they'd been trimmed with a knife. A hand that had seen work. A hand that could probably break her wrist without much effort. "Come," he said. Not a command. Not quite a request either. Somewhere in between. She looked past him at the mounted riders. The woman sat a painted horse, her hair wound into a thick braid that hung over one shoulder. She was watching Alara with an expression that might have been interest or might have been assessment, hard to tell. Alara looked back at the tall man's outstretched hand, then at Boone, who was already mentally spending whatever profit he'd make from this deal, then at the dust devils still spinning their brief, pointless lives in the yard. She put her bound wrists in the tall man's hand. His fingers closed around the rope, not around her wrists, around the rope itself, and he led her toward the horses like she was something fragile that might spook. One of the mounted men dismounted smoothly and offered his horse. The tall man boosted Alara up into the saddle with hands that were firm but not rough, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she went stiff. "Easy," he murmured. Not to her, to the horse. They rode. Alara had expected direction, questions maybe, some kind of explanation about where they were going, or what would be expected of her, or how this arrangement would work. She got silence. The tall man, she still didn't know his name, guided the horse with barely perceptible movements, his body shifting in the saddle like he and the animal were having a conversation she wasn't part of. Behind them, the other 3 riders followed, spaced out, not bunched together like most traveling groups did. The land here was all rolling hills and scattered brush, dotted with juniper and the occasional stubborn pine that had found water somewhere underground. The sun climbed toward noon, and heat came with it, the dry kind that pulled moisture out of everything. Nobody spoke. Alara counted the horse's steps for a while. 1, 2, 3, 4. Parfois. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then lost count somewhere past 200 and just let the rhythm carry her. Her wrists were still bound. The tall man hadn't removed the rope, but he hadn't tightened it either, and after an hour or so she realized the binding had gone loose enough that she could probably slip out of it if she tried. She didn't try. The woman rider pulled up alongside them at one point. She said something in that Riverstone language, and the tall man responded without looking at her. The woman glanced at Alara, said something else that might have been a question, then dropped back again. They stopped once, at a creek that ran shallow and fast over smooth rocks. The tall man dismounted and helped Alara down, still that same careful handling, like she was made of something that might crack, then gestured toward the water. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. "Drink," he repeated, and walked a few yards upstream to do the same. Alara knelt at the creek edge. The water ran so clear she could count the pebbles on the bottom, could see tiny fish darting between the shadows. She cupped her bound hands and drank. It tasted like stone and snow, cold enough to make her teeth ache. When she looked up, the woman rider was crouched on the other side of the creek, watching her. Up close, Alara could see she was younger than she'd seemed from a distance, maybe 30, with a face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than wood. She wore her hair in that single thick braid, and her clothes were decorated with small shells that clicked softly when she moved. "Name," the woman said. Alara blinked. "What?" "Name. You have name?" Her English was rougher than the tall man's, shaped by an accent that turned vowels into something rounder. "Alara," she said. Then, because it seemed important to establish that she wasn't just property, "Alara Vance." The woman nodded slowly, like she was tasting the syllables. "L-R-A. Strange name." "It was my grandmother's." "Dead?" "Yes." "Good name to carry, then. Dead names have power." The woman stood, brushing water from her hands. "I am Naya. That—" She gestured upstream toward the tall man. "Is Kael. Kael Ruun. You understand? Kael Ruun." "Kael," Alara repeated. "Yes. He bought you." The words landed like a stone in her stomach. "I know." "You afraid?" Alara considered lying, considered what answer might be safest, then decided safety was probably an illusion anyway. "Yes," she said. Naya smiled. Not cruelly, not kindly either. Just smiled. "Good," she said. "Fear keeps you smart. But Kyle Ruin is not like your other men. You will see." Then she walked back to her horse, shells clicking, and mounted with the kind of grace that suggested she'd been riding since before she could walk. They reached the settlement just before sunset. Alara had been expecting something rough, maybe a few shacks clustered together, or a camp of tents and cook fires. What she got was a village. It spread across a wide canyon floor, maybe 30 structures built from stone and adobe and weathered wood, some dug partially into the canyon walls themselves. Gardens grew in terraced plots, corn and squash and beans climbing up stakes and trellises. There were corrals with horses and goats, racks with drying meat and herbs, children running between the buildings in a way that suggested they felt safe enough to make noise. People emerged as the riders came in. Not quickly, not with alarm. Just a gradual gathering, men and women and elders and children, all dressed in variations of the same handmade clothing, all watching with that same neutral expression Alara was starting to recognize. Kael dismounted and spoke briefly with an older man whose hair had gone entirely white. They gestured toward Alara a few times, but she couldn't hear what they were saying. The white-haired man looked at her the way you might look at a new horse, assessing, but not unkind. Then Kael came back and helped her down from the saddle. Her legs had gone stiff from riding, and she stumbled slightly. He steadied her with one hand on her elbow, waited until she had her balance, then released her. "Come," he said, and started walking. Alara followed because she didn't know what else to do. He led her through the village, past the watching faces, past the gardens and corrals, past a central fire pit where something that smelled incredibly good was cooking in a large pot, to a structure built against the canyon wall. It was larger than most of the others, with a door made from planks and leather hinges and windows covered with what looked like oiled cloth. Inside, it was dim and cool. Her eyes adjusted slowly, picking out details. Woven mats on the floor, a low table, shelves holding clay pots and baskets, a sleeping platform covered in furs and blankets. Everything was orderly, clean, the kind of space that suggested someone lived here who understood the value of knowing where things were. Cale gestured to the floor. Sit. Elara sat. He disappeared through a doorway at the back and returned a moment later with a clay bowl full of water and a cloth. He set them down in front of her, then crouched and reached for her bound wrists. She pulled back instinctively. He paused, looked at her face. Then very slowly, very deliberately, he took his knife from its sheath and held it up so she could see it clearly. Bone handle, sharp blade, well maintained. He showed it to her the way you might show a nervous dog that you weren't holding anything threatening. Then he pointed at the rope around her wrists. Off, he said. Elara extended her hands. He cut the rope with one smooth motion and set the knife aside, well out of reach. Then he took the cloth, dipped it in the water, and began cleaning her wrists where the rope had left red marks. Elara sat frozen. She couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with gentleness. Couldn't remember when a man's hands had done anything except hurt or use or claim. This felt wrong. Felt like a trick. Felt like something that would cost her in ways she hadn't figured out yet. Cale worked in silence, washing the rope burns, checking that the skin wasn't broken. His hands were huge. They made her wrists look like kindling, but his touch stayed light. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. Hungry? He asked. Elara's stomach answered before she could, growling loud enough that it echoed in the quiet space. Something that might have been amusement crossed Cale's face. He stood, went to one of the shelves, and came back with a wooden bowl and a spoon. Then he went to a pot hanging over a small fire pit in the corner and ladled out something that looked like stew. He handed her the bowl. She took it carefully, expecting what? For him to make her beg for it? For it to be some kind of test? Eat, he said. She ate. It was good, better than good. Meat and vegetables cooked until everything was tender, flavored with herbs she didn't recognize. She tried to eat slowly, tried to maintain some kind of dignity, but her body had other ideas. She'd been running on stale bread and jerky for the last 2 days, and before that, Boone's household hadn't exactly been generous with meals. Cale watched her eat without comment. When she finished, he took the bowl, refilled it without asking, and handed it back. More, he said. Not a question. Elara ate the second bowl more slowly, aware of him watching, aware of the strangeness of this entire situation. She was in a stranger's house, in a village full of people whose language she didn't speak, owned, bought and paid for by a man who hadn't explained anything about what he expected from her, and he was feeding her stew. When she finished the second bowl, he took it and set it aside. Then he stood and pulled a bundle from one of the shelves, folded cloth and what looked like soft leather. For you, he said, setting it on the floor beside her. Clean clothes, you wash first. He pointed toward the back doorway, where she could now hear water running. A bath. He was offering her a bath. Elara's throat went tight. She couldn't speak, couldn't figure out what this was, or what it meant, or what would happen after. Cale seemed to sense her confusion. He crouched again, putting himself at eye level with her. You are here now, he said slowly, like he was choosing each word carefully. Not his. Not anyone's. Here. You understand? Elara shook her head. I don't understand any of this. You will. He stood and walked toward the front door. Then he paused and looked back at her. Bath, he said. Clean clothes. Rest. Tomorrow. He seemed to search for words. Tomorrow we begin. Begin what? But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a soft sound that felt final. Elara sat in the dim room for a long time, listening to the water running somewhere behind her, listening to the sounds of the village outside. Voices, footsteps, the crackle of fires, someone singing. She looked at her hands, at the red marks on her wrists where the rope had been, at the clean clothes folded neatly beside her. Then she stood and walked through the back doorway. The space beyond was small, carved partially into the canyon wall. Water ran from a crack in the stone into a wide basin, then out through a channel that disappeared into the floor. Steam rose from the basin. Someone had heated the water, or maybe the stone itself was warm, she couldn't tell. There were more cloths folded nearby, and what looked like soap made from ash and fat. Elara stripped slowly, peeling off the layers she'd been wearing for days, the stained dress, the thin shift beneath it, The bonnet she'd hidden behind for so long she'd almost forgotten what her own hair looked like. She stepped into the basin. The water was perfect, hot enough to unknot muscles, cool enough not to burn. She sank into it and felt something in her chest crack open just slightly, not breaking, just opening. She washed, scrubbed at skin that had been too long ignored, worked soap through hair that had tangled into knots, cleaned under nails and between toes and all the small places that mattered. The water turned gray, then darker. She didn't care. When she finally climbed out, she felt lighter. She dried with the cloths and dressed in the clean clothes Kyle had left, soft pants that tied at the waist, a long shirt that hung to her thighs. Everything sized too large but comfortable in a way she'd forgotten clothes could be. She walked back into the main room and found food waiting on the low table. Not stew this time, bread and cheese and dried fruit, arranged simply on a wooden plate. A clay cup sat beside it, filled with something that smelled herbal. Kale wasn't there. Alara ate slowly this time, tasting each bite, trying to understand what was happening, trying to find the trap she knew must be waiting somewhere in all this gentleness. She couldn't find it. When she finished eating, exhaustion hit her like a falling stone. Her body, finally fed and clean and warm, decided it was done. She looked at the sleeping platform with its furs and blankets and thought about how long it had been since she'd slept anywhere soft. She lay down. The furs smelled like smoke and sage. The blankets were heavy in a way that felt protective rather than suffocating. She could hear the village outside, settling into night, fires being banked, voices going quiet, dogs barking at nothing. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Alara Vance slept without fear. She woke to hands in her hair. Panic slammed through her and she jerked upright, hands coming up to defend herself, a scream building in her throat. Easy. Kale's voice, low and calm. Easy. He was sitting on the edge of the sleeping platform, his hands still raised where they'd been touching her hair. Morning light filtered through the oiled cloth windows, turning everything amber and gold. Alara's heart hammered. She'd fallen asleep. She'd let her guard down. She'd not hurt, Kale said, watching her with that same neutral expression. Never hurt. You understand? She pressed back against the wall, breathing hard. What are you doing? He held up something she hadn't noticed before. A comb, carved from what looked like bone, with symbols etched along its spine. Your hair, he said. It tangles. I fix. You were touching my hair. Yes. While I was asleep. Yes. Alara stared at him. Why? Kale tilted his head slightly, like the question confused him. It is the way, he said finally. First night, hair is tended. It is beginning. You understand? No, I don't understand anything. He nodded slowly, like this was an acceptable answer. Then he set the comb on the platform between them and stood. Today, he said, you watch, you learn. Tonight, I explain better. Yes? Alara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Do I have a choice? Something shifted in his expression, not quite sadness, not quite disappointment, something else. Always choice, he said. You stay, you go. You learn, you don't learn. Always choice. But if you stay, he paused, searching for words. If you stay, you do it right. The way of the people, not his way, not the old way, our way. He walked to the door, then looked back. Come when ready, he said. I wait outside. Then he left. Alara sat in the warm light, holding the blanket, staring at the bone comb with its strange symbols. She thought about running, about slipping out while the village was still waking, finding a horse, heading where? Back to Boone? Back to her father who'd sold her in the first place. Further into territory she didn't know, with no food, no water, no skills for surviving alone. She picked up the comb. The symbols carved into it looked like birds. Or maybe stars. Hard to tell. But someone had spent time on this, had made it beautiful for no reason except that beautiful things mattered. She ran it through her hair carefully, working out the tangles, feeling the teeth slide through sections that hadn't been properly combed in months. Her hair was longer than she'd realized, falling past her shoulders now that it was clean. When she finished, she set the comb down and stood. She walked to the door. Outside, the village was fully awake. People moved between buildings, tending gardens, working on repairs, preparing food. Children ran in packs, laughing and shouting in that Riverstone language. Dogs trotted importantly from place to place, supervising everything. Kyle stood a few yards from the door, talking with Naya. They both looked up when Alara emerged. Naya smiled, that same not cruel, not kind expression from yesterday. "You live," she said. "Good. Some women, first night, they cry all the time. Very loud. Very—" She waved her hand in a gesture that suggested annoyance. "You don't cry. Better." "I'm too tired to cry," Alara said. Naya laughed. It sounded like stones tumbling. "Yes. Good reason. Come. You work today?" "Work?" "Everyone works. That is the way. You work, you eat, you don't work." She shrugged. "You still eat. But better to work. Makes time go faster." Kale said something in their language. Naya nodded and replied, then looked back at Alara. "He says you come with me today. Learn women's work. Garden, cook, make things. Man's work comes later if you want. But first, woman's work. Yes?" Alara glanced at Kyle. He met her eyes steadily, waiting. "Yes," she said finally, because what else was there to say? "Good." Naya clapped her hands once. "Then we start with water. Always start with water. Come." She walked off without checking if Alara was following. Alara looked at Kyle one more time. He nodded slightly, not quite approval, not quite encouragement, just acknowledgement. Then she followed Naya into the village. The day unfolded in a rhythm Alara didn't expect. Naya led her first to the creek that ran along the canyon's edge. The same creek they'd stopped at yesterday, she realized, or one that fed from the same source. Women were already there, filling clay vessels and hide bags, talking in that flowing language that Alara was starting to hear patterns in, even if she couldn't understand the words yet. They stopped talking when Alara approached. Not hostile, just aware, assessing this stranger in their midst. Naya said something that made a few of them laugh, then she handed Alara a clay jug. "Fill," she said. "Carry back. Don't drop. These pots are good pots, take long time to make." Alara filled the jug carefully and hoisted it up. It was heavier than she'd expected, and the balance was tricky, but she'd carried worse. She followed Naya back through the village, trying not to slosh water everywhere, hyper-aware of the eyes watching her. They made 3 trips. By the third, Alara's shoulders were burning and her hands had started to cramp, but none of the other women had stopped, so she didn't either. After water came garden work. Naya led her to the terraced plots and handed her a digging stick. "Weeds," she said, pointing at the plants growing between the corn stalks. "Pull them. Leave the good plants. You know which is which?" Alara looked at the garden. "I've worked gardens before." "Good. Then work." It was hot. The sun climbed high and beat down on the canyon floor, and there was no shade in the garden plots. Alara's back started aching within an hour. Sweat ran into her eyes. Her hands blistered around the digging stick. She kept working. The other women worked around her, moving efficiently through their sections, occasionally saying things to each other that made them smile or laugh. One of them, an older woman with gray streaking through her hair, stopped at one point and showed Alara a better way to hold the digging stick that put less strain on her wrists. Alara nodded thanks. The woman patted her shoulder and moved on. They broke at midday. Someone had brought food, more of that good bread, and a thick paste made from beans and peppers that burned Alara's mouth in the best way. They ate sitting in the shade of the canyon wall, passing water skins, not talking much. Alara ate and listened to the conversation flowing around her, picking up sounds that repeated, trying to match them to actions or objects. She was good at patterns. Always had been. It was how she'd survived. After the meal, Naya took her to a different area where several women were working with hides, scraping them, treating them, cutting them into shapes. The smell was intense, a mix of smoke and fat and something mineral. "You know this work?" Naya asked. "Some," Alara said. "I've cleaned hides before." "Good. Then you help Seti. She gestured to a younger woman who was struggling with a particularly thick hide. Seti's hands are small, yours are bigger. Better for this work. Alara joined Seti and took over the scraping. The girl, she couldn't have been more than 16, smiled gratefully and shifted to a different task. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of scraping meditative in its repetition. Alara's mind drifted, processing the strangeness of everything. The fact that she was here. The fact that she was working alongside these women like she belonged. The fact that Kael had bought her and then, what, fed her? Let her sleep? Tried to comb her hair while she slept, which was still deeply weird, but hadn't tried to do anything else? You are Kael Rune's woman now? Alara looked up. Seti was watching her with open curiosity. I don't know what I am, Alara said honestly. Seti nodded, like this made perfect sense. He is a good man, strong, kind. Many women would want to be his woman, but he never chose before. Strange that he chose you. The word should have stung. Probably were meant to, not cruelly, just truthfully. Strange that he chose someone broken, you mean, Alara said. Seti's eyes widened. No, strange that he chose someone from outside. We thought he would choose someone from the people. But you, she gestured vaguely at Alara's face. You have survived something that is not broken, that is strong. Alara set down the scraping tool. You don't think this, she touched her scar, is ugly? Ugly? Seti looked genuinely confused. It is a mark. Marks tell stories. Why would a story be ugly? Because that's what everyone else had always told her. Because she'd spent years being treated like damaged goods, like something that needed to be hidden away. Because the scar had become a brand that marked her as less than. But looking at Seti's open, curious face, Alara couldn't find a way to explain that. Different ways of seeing, she said finally. Yes, Seti agreed. Your people see different than we see, but you are here now, so maybe you learn to see different too. She went back to her work, leaving Alara to process that. So, the afternoon wore on. Alara moved from task to task as Naya directed, helping prepare food, mending a tear in a piece of cloth, grinding corn into meal using a stone that made her arms shake with effort. Each task was simple. Each task was also harder than it looked. But nobody rushed her. Nobody criticized when she did something wrong. They just showed her the right way and let her try again. As the sun started dropping toward the canyon rim, Naya finally called a halt. Enough, she said. You work good for first day. Tomorrow, more work. But now, she gestured toward the center of the village, where people were gathering around the fire pit. Now, we eat together. Alara followed her to the fire. The smell of cooking food made her stomach growl despite the fact that she'd eaten at midday. Someone was roasting meat over the coals. Rabbit maybe, or some kind of bird. Pots of vegetables bubbled. Fresh bread was being pulled from a clay oven. People filled their bowls and found places to sit, on logs, on stones, on the ground itself. There didn't seem to be assigned spots or hierarchy to the seating. People just sat where there was room. Naya handed Alara a bowl. Fill, eat, sit with the women if you want, or... She nodded toward where Kael was sitting with a group of men. Sit with Kael, your choice. Alara filled her bowl and found a spot near the women, close enough to the fire to feel its warmth as the evening cooled. She ate slowly, listening to the conversations around her, watching the way people interacted. There was laughter, teasing, someone telling a story that made everyone listen closely, then erupt in amazement or disbelief. Children running between the adults being tolerated with patient affection. It felt normal, like a community, like people who knew each other well enough to be comfortable together. Alara had never lived anywhere like this, had never been part of something that felt this stable. She glanced across the fire and found Kael watching her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, just held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slightly. She nodded back. After the meal, people began drifting away to their own homes or to various tasks. Someone started playing an instrument, something stringed that made soft, complex sounds. A few people sang along, their voices blending in harmonies that raised the hair on Alara's arms. Naya touched her shoulder. Kael wants to talk with you. Go. Alara stood, brushing crumbs from her borrowed pants, and walked around the fire to where Kael waited. He gestured toward his home. Come. Inside, the lamps had been lit, filling the space with warm light. Kael gestured for her to sit at the low table, then sat across from her. He pulled out the bone comb and set it between them. I explain now, he said, about hair, about this. He touched the comb. You listen? Alara nodded. He took a breath, organizing his thoughts. His English came slower when he was trying to explain complex things she'd noticed. When person comes to the people, he said, when they become part of us, there is a beginning ritual. First night, hair is tended, braided. It means you are cared for. You belong to yourself, but you are cared for by the people. You understand? You were trying to braid my hair. Yes, but you were sleeping. I should have waited. He paused, searching for words. I wanted you to know, even in sleep, that you were safe, that you were tended. This was wrong. I should have waited. Alara processed this. Is that why you bought me? To make me part of your people? No. He met her eyes directly. I bought you because boon carvers should not own people. Because the way you stood, even broken, even traded like goods, you stood like someone who had not given up. That is rare. That is worth preserving. So you saved me. No, you saved yourself. You survived. I only gave you a place to do it somewhere different. Alara touched her own hair, still loose around her shoulders. The braid means I belong here? The braid means you are beginning to belong, if you choose it. He pushed the comb toward her. This is yours now, gift. When you are ready, you tell me. I braid, or you don't tell me. You braid yourself, or you don't braid at all. Always choice. What if I choose to leave? Kael's expression didn't change. Then you leave. You are not bound. You were never bound, even with rope. You are here because you are here. Nothing else. That doesn't make sense. You bought me. I paid for Boon Carver to lose claim to you. I did not buy you. You cannot buy a person. You can only buy their freedom. Alara stared at him. That's the same thing. No, not the same. One means you owe me. Other means you owe yourself. Big difference. He stood and walked to the back room, returning a moment later with a bundle of blankets. He set them on the floor near the wall, creating a separate sleeping area. You sleep on platform, he said, gesturing to the furs. I sleep here. Until you say different. Yes? Alara looked at the platform, then at the floor where he was arranging his blankets. This is your home, she said. I should sleep on the floor. No, you are guest. Guests get good sleeping place. This is the way. I'm not a guest. You own me. I don't own you. He said it patiently, like explaining something obvious to a child. I told you this. You own you. Now you just do it here instead of there. Better here, safer here, but still you. He finished arranging his blankets and sat down on them, clearly ending the conversation. Alara stood there for a long moment, trying to find the trap, trying to understand the angle. She couldn't find it. Finally, she walked to the platform and lay down. She could hear Kael settling onto his blankets, hear his breathing even out as he relaxed. She stared at the ceiling, at the shadows the lamplight made on the stone and adobe. Kael, she said quietly. Yes? Thank you. For today. For this. Silence. Then, you don't thank me for what should be normal. Sleep now. Tomorrow, more work. Alara closed her eyes. And despite everything, despite the strangeness and the confusion and the fact that nothing about this made sense, she felt safe. That terrified her more than anything else had. The days blurred together in a way that should have felt monotonous but didn't. Alara woke each morning to the sound of the village stirring. Voices, footsteps, the clatter of cooking pots, dogs barking their morning opinions about everything. She'd lie there for a moment, disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then she'd remember. The canyon, the people. Kyle sleeping on his pile of blankets near the wall like he was guarding the door. He was always gone by the time she fully woke. She'd find food waiting, bread, dried fruit, sometimes eggs cooked in fat that tasted like it had been flavored with wild herbs. Always enough, never wasteful. She'd eat alone, then join the women for the day's work. Water hauling, garden tending, hide scraping, corn grinding, food preparation, mending. The tasks rotated, but the rhythm stayed constant. Wake, work, eat, sleep. Simple, almost brutally so. Alara had expected to hate it, had expected the repetition to feel like another kind of captivity. Instead, she found herself settling into it like a body finding the shape of a well-worn bed. The women slowly warmed to her, not with dramatic declarations of friendship, nothing here seemed dramatic, but with small gestures. Seti started sitting next to her during meals, chattering away in a mix of her language and broken English, pointing at things and teaching Alara words. Sky, haska, water, mini, fire, peta. Alara repeated them, stumbling over pronunciations, making Seti laugh. The older woman who'd shown her the better way to hold the digging stick, her name was Wakia, Alara learned, began checking on her throughout the day, correcting her form on various tasks with patient hands and fewer words than Seti, but more impact. When Alara's blisters burst and bled, Wakia took her to a shaded spot and wrapped her hands with cloth soaked in something that stung viciously and then went numb. Soft hands, Wakia said in halting English. City hands. We'll get strong. Takes time. I'm not from a city, Alara said. Wakia shrugged. Any place with weak hands is city to me. Even Naya, who'd initially seemed indifferent, started including Alara in conversations, translating key points, explaining customs, occasionally making dry observations about the men that made the other women snort with laughter. That one, Naya said one afternoon, pointing at a young man strutting past with his chest puffed out, thinks he is great hunter because he killed one deer. One deer! My grandmother killed deer with her bare hands when she was his age. Now he wants 3 wives. 3! Someone should tell him he cannot even handle one. The women laughed. Alara found herself laughing too. It felt strange, foreign, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit but might, eventually, if she wore them long enough. Kale remained a mystery. She saw him throughout the day, working with the men, training horses in one of the corrals, sitting with the elders in long conversations she couldn't hear. He'd nod at her when their paths crossed. Sometimes he'd pause and ask, "You are well?" She'd say yes. He'd nod again and move on. At night, he'd return to the dwelling after she'd already eaten with the women. He'd bring his own food, eat quietly, then work on various tasks, sharpening tools, mending tack, carving things from wood or bone. He never intruded on her space, never tried to touch her again after that first morning when she'd woken to his hands in her hair. They existed in the same space like 2 rivers running parallel, close, but never quite merging. On the 5th night, Alara broke the silence. Why did you really buy me? Kyle looked up from the knife he was sharpening. The whetstone made a rhythmic scraping sound that stopped when she spoke. I told you, he said. You told me what you thought I needed to hear, not the truth. He set the knife down carefully. Why do you think there is difference? Because people always have reasons they say and reasons they don't say. The second ones are usually more true. Kyle studied her for a long moment. The lamplight carved shadows under his cheekbones made his eyes harder to read. You want truth? He asked. Yes. 3 years ago, my sister was taken by raiders. They came from the east, white men who thought our women were goods to trade. They took 5 women. We tracked them for 6 days. When we found them, he paused. My sister was already dead. The others were changed, broken in ways that don't heal. Alara's chest tightened. We brought them home, Kyle continued, tried to help them become themselves again. 2 did. 2 did not. One hung herself from a tree. The other walked into the desert and did not come back. He picked up the knife again but didn't resume sharpening. So when I saw you, standing in that yard, I saw my sister. Saw someone who survived what should have killed them. Saw someone who needed a place to be that was not where they were. So you did save me. No, I gave you a choice. That is different than saving. Is it? Yes. Saving means you owe. Choice means you decide. I cannot save anyone. Only they can save themselves, but I can give them place to do it. Alara wrapped her arms around herself. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken? Then you are broken here instead of there. Still better. That's not comforting. I am not here to comfort. I am here to give you space to exist. What you do with it, that is yours. He went back to sharpening the knife. The scraping sound filled the silence between them. Alara lay down on the platform but didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and thought about his sister. About the women who'd survived and the ones who hadn't. About the fact that she was here because someone else's tragedy had taught Kael that silence and space were sometimes more valuable than words and action. She wasn't sure if that made her grateful or angry. Maybe both. The second week brought new challenges. Wakia decided Alara was ready to learn more complex tasks. She was handed a basket of wool that needed to be spun into thread. You know spinning? Wakia asked. A little, Alara lied. She'd seen it done but had never actually done it herself. Wakia handed her a drop spindle and a clump of wool. Then spin, Alara tried. The spindle wobbled, dropped, tangled the wool into a mess that looked nothing like thread. She tried again. Same result. Wakia watched for maybe 30 seconds before sighing deeply and taking the spindle back. Like this, she said, and demonstrated with movements so quick and efficient that Alara barely tracked them. See? Simple. It was not simple. Alara spent the entire afternoon producing thread so uneven and lumpy that Seti dissolved into giggles when she saw it. This is very bad, Seti said, trying to be kind and failing. Maybe you should stick to carrying water. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, wanted to point out that she'd never claimed to be good at this. Instead, she picked up the spindle and tried again. By evening, her thread was still terrible, but slightly less terrible than it had been that morning. Wakia inspected it, made a non-committal sound, and handed her more wool. Practice, she said. Everything is practice. That night, Kael found her sitting outside the dwelling, still working the spindle by firelight, determined to produce at least one length of thread that didn't look like it had been made by a drunk spider. He sat down beside her without speaking and watched her work. It's awful, Alara said after a while. Yes, Kael agreed. You're supposed to say it's not that bad. Why would I lie? Alara laughed despite herself. Most people would. Most people think lying makes things easier. It does not. It only delays the truth. He reached over and adjusted her grip on the spindle slightly. Try now. She tried. The thread came out marginally better. See, he said. Small change, big difference. Everything is like this. Small adjustments, time, practice. Is that how you see people too? Small adjustments until they work right? No, people are not things to fix. People are... He searched for words. People are water. You cannot fix water. You can only give it a place to flow and see where it goes. Alara let that settle. That's almost poetic. My grandmother said it first. I'm only repeating. Smart grandmother. Yes. She also said I talk too much and think too little, so maybe not all her wisdom was correct. He stood and went inside, leaving Alara alone with her terrible thread and the strange warmth of something that might have been friendship beginning to take shape. The third week, Naya announced it was time for Alara to learn to ride properly. Not just sitting behind someone else, she said. Real riding. You cannot live here and not ride. That is like living near water and not knowing how to swim. They took her to the corrals where a stocky mare with a patient expression stood waiting. This is Maka, Naya said. She is old. She is slow. She is perfect for people who do not know what they are doing. I can ride, Alara protested. Then show me. Alara mounted, or tried to. Maka sidestepped at the last moment and Alara ended up sprawled in the dust. From somewhere behind her she heard male laughter. She stood up, brushed herself off, and tried again. This time Maka stood still and let her mount. Alara settled into the saddle, gathered the reins, and nudged the mare forward. Maka didn't move. Alara nudged harder. Maka flicked an ear and continued not moving. "You have to ask correctly," Naya called. "She knows when you do not mean it." "I mean it." "No, you hope it. Different thing." Alara closed her eyes, took a breath, and tried to remember how Kael had sat in the saddle. That complete certainty, that sense of being part of the horse rather than on top of it. She shifted her weight slightly, pressed her legs against Maka's sides with firm intention rather than tentative hope. Maka walked forward. "Better," Naya said. "Now keep doing that for next hour." Alara spent the next hour walking in circles while Naya corrected everything. Her posture, her hands, her leg position, the way she sat when Maka changed gaits. By the end, her thighs burned and her back ached, and she was fairly certain she'd never walk normally again. "Good," Naya said when she finally allowed Alara to dismount. "Tomorrow, you do it again. Next week, we try trotting. Maybe." "Maybe?" "Depends if you stop flopping around like dead fish." Alara wanted to be offended, but she'd seen her reflection in the water trough. She had, in fact, been flopping around like a dead fish. She limped back toward the dwelling, muscles screaming, and found Kael waiting outside with a clay jar. "Sit," he said. She sat. He opened the jar, some kind of salve that smelled like pine and mint and something medicinal, and handed it to her. "For the soreness," he said. "Rub it on your legs. You will hurt less tomorrow." "You watched me make an idiot of myself, didn't you?" "Everyone looks foolish when learning. It is part of learning." "That doesn't make it less embarrassing." "No, but it makes it normal." He stood. "You did well. Naya said you listen better than most. That is rare." He went inside before Alara could figure out how to respond to what might have been a compliment. She rubbed the salve into her aching muscles and tried not to think about how strange it was that kindness from someone who barely spoke felt more substantial than all the pretty words she'd heard from men who'd talked constantly. On the 18th day, Kael asked her a question. They were eating the evening meal, a shared silence that had become comfortable, when he set down his bowl and looked at her directly. "You still wear the bonnet," he said. "Why?" Alara's hand went automatically to her head. She'd kept the bonnet, had been wearing it during the day, even though nobody here seemed to care about her scar. It was habit, protection, a way to control what people saw. "It's what I'm used to," she said. "But you do not need it here." "Maybe I need it for me." Kael nodded slowly. "That is fair. But I ask you to think, is it protecting you or hiding you? What's the difference? Protecting keeps you safe, hiding keeps you small." "You are not small, Alara Vance. You survived things that should have made you small, but you did not become small, so why pretend?" He didn't wait for an answer, just picked up his bowl and continued eating like he hadn't just taken apart one of her fundamental defenses with a handful of words. That night, Alara lay on the platform and stared at the bonnet where she'd hung it on a peg. In the lamplight, it looked like a ghost of who she'd been. A reminder of all the times someone had told her to cover up, hide the ugliness, make herself presentable. She'd worn it so long she'd forgotten what her own face felt like in open air. She got up, walked to the peg, and took the bonnet down. She held it in her hands. Soft fabric, worn edges, the ties she'd braided and rebraided 100 times. Then she folded it carefully and set it on a shelf. Her hand shook slightly. She went back to bed and pulled the blankets up, suddenly cold despite the warm night. From his place near the wall, Kael's voice came quiet in the darkness. "Tomorrow will be easier." "How do you know?" "Because every tomorrow after a hard choice is easier than the today that held it." Alara closed her eyes and tried to believe him. The next morning, she walked out into the village without the bonnet. The sun hit her face fully for the first time in years. The scar tissue felt tight in the warmth, pulled differently than the rest of her skin. She fought the urge to cover it with her hand. Seti saw her first. The girl's eyes widened slightly, then she smiled and said something in her language that sounded approving. Wakia looked up from the fire she was tending, grunted, and went back to her work. Naya walked past, paused, and nodded once. "Better," she said. "Now you look like yourself." Alara wanted to ask what that meant. How Naya could possibly know what Alara's self looked like when Alara barely knew herself. But Naya was already moving on, calling instructions to someone about the day's tasks. The day unfolded like all the others. Work, food, more work, conversations in multiple languages, children running underfoot, dogs investigating everything. But Alara felt different in it, more present, more exposed, yes, but also more real. People looked at her face and looked away, not with disgust, just with the same casual acknowledgement they gave everything else. The scar was there. So what? Everyone had marks. Seti had a burn on her arm from a cooking fire. Wakia's hands were gnarled from years of work. One of the men, Chaitan, she'd learned his name was, walked with a pronounced limp from an old injury that hadn't healed right. Bodies carried history here. Nobody pretended otherwise. That evening, as the village gathered for the meal, Kael sat down beside her. He didn't comment on the missing bonnet, didn't make a big gesture of acknowledgement. He just handed her a bowl of food and said, "Eat, you worked hard today." And somehow that small, unremarkable statement felt like the biggest recognition she'd ever received. The fourth week brought the first real test. A group of traders arrived at the village, 3 white men on tired horses looking to exchange goods. They had furs to trade, some tools, ammunition. They needed food, fresh horses, information about the territory to the west. Alara was working in the garden when she heard the commotion. She looked up and saw them riding in, and her whole body went cold. They looked like Boone's men, sounded like them, moved like them. Men who saw the world as things to be taken or traded, who measured value in what they could extract. One of them caught sight of her and stared. She saw his eyes track the scar, saw the slight curl of his lip. "What happened to you, darling?" he called across the garden. "Run into a mountain lion?" The women around Alara went quiet, watching. Alara straightened slowly, dirt-stained hands clenching around the digging stick. "None of your concern," she said. "Oh, don't be like that, just making conversation." He dismounted, started walking toward the garden. "You one of the tribal women? Didn't think they took in strays." "Keep walking," Alara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Or what? You gonna hit me with that stick?" He laughed. "Listen, sweetheart, I'm just—" Kyle appeared between them so fast the trader stumbled backward. Alara hadn't even seen him coming. One moment the path was clear, the next Kyle was there, positioned not quite between her and the trader, but slightly to the side. Not protecting her like she was helpless, but standing with her like she was someone worth standing with. "She told you to keep walking," Kyle said. His voice was level, almost conversational, but something in his posture made the trader go very still. "Didn't mean no offense," the trader said, hands raising slightly. "Just being friendly." "Then be friendly somewhere else." The trader looked at Alara, at Kyle, at the women who'd stopped working to watch. He clearly wanted to say something else. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words, but whatever he saw in Kyle's expression made him reconsider. "Sure," he said. "No problem." He walked back to his companions, and Alara heard him mutter something that included the word savage. Kyle heard it too. His shoulders tensed fractionally. Then Alara's hand was on his arm. She didn't remember deciding to reach out, just found herself touching him, stopping him. "He's not worth it," she said quietly. Kale looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "You are sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." He nodded once and stepped back. The traders concluded their business quickly and left. The moment they rode out of the canyon, Alara felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying drain out of her shoulders. Wakia walked over and handed her the digging stick she'd dropped. "Good," the older woman said. "Good? You stood. You did not run. You did not hide. And she nodded toward where Kyle had returned to his work. "You stopped foolish revenge. That is wisdom. Both things." She walked away before Alara could respond. Seti appeared at her other elbow. "That man was pig," she said matter-of-factly. "You should have let Kyle hit him. Violence doesn't solve anything." "Sometimes it does," Seti said cheerfully, "but sometimes words work better. You used words, very strong words. I was impressed." That night, Kael built up the fire larger than usual and sat down across from Alara with an expression that suggested he had something to say and wasn't sure how to start. "You stopped me today," he said finally. "Yes." "Why?" Alara thought about it. "Because you were going to hurt him for me, and I don't need that anymore." "You do not want me to defend you?" "I want—" She paused, trying to find the right words. "I want to defend myself. I want to stand on my own. And if I can't do that, I want to fall on my own." "Does that make sense?" "Yes." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "My sister, before she was taken, she was like you. Strong, proud. She wanted to solve her own problems. I tried to protect her anyway, tried to keep her safe. And when the raiders came, I was not there because I was hunting, being strong, being provider, and she was gone. That wasn't your fault. I know, but knowing and feeling are different. I have tried not to make that mistake again, tried not to think I can protect people from the world. But old habits are hard to kill." "So are old fears," Alara said. "I spent so long being told I needed protecting that I started to believe it, started to think I was something that needed to be kept safe because I couldn't keep myself safe. And maybe that was true for a while. But it's not true anymore." "No," Kael agreed. "It is not." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn. "Tomorrow," Kael said eventually, "I want to show you something, if you want to see it." "What is it?" "A place. A good place. But it is long ride. You would need to come on Maka." "I can handle that. We leave early, just us." Something in Ilara's chest tightened, not fear exactly, something else. "Why just us?" "Because some things are better seen without crowd, and because I think you are ready to see it." He stood and went to his sleeping area, ending the conversation in his typical abrupt way. Alara lay awake long after the fire died down, wondering what place could be important enough for Kael to take her alone, wondering if she was ready for whatever this meant, wondering when exactly she'd started to trust this quiet man who'd bought her freedom and asked for nothing in return. They left before dawn. Maka plodded along patiently while Kael's horse, a tall gelding with a white blaze, set an easy pace. They rode out of the canyon and into open country, heading north toward a line of red cliffs that caught the early light and burned like coals. Kael didn't talk much, just pointed out occasional landmarks, offered water when they stopped to rest the horses, made sure Alara wasn't getting too sore from the long ride. Around midday, they reached a narrow canyon that cut deep into the cliffs. Kael dismounted and gestured for Alara to do the same. "We walk from here," he said. He led the horses into the canyon, and Alara followed. The walls rose high on either side, close enough that she could almost touch both at once if she stretched her arms out. The stone was smooth, carved by ancient water into curves and hollows that looked almost deliberate. They walked for maybe 20 minutes, the canyon twisting and turning, the light changing from gold to amber to deep red as it filtered down through the narrow opening above. Then the canyon opened up. Alara stopped walking. She was standing at the edge of a hidden valley, small, maybe half a mile across, circled completely by sheer cliffs. Water poured from a crack high in the rock wall, falling in a thin cascade that caught the sunlight and shattered it into rainbows. It fed a pool so clear she could see fish moving in its depths, and from the pool a stream ran through the valley floor, feeding grass and wildflowers and trees that shouldn't have been able to grow in this dry country. It was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. "This is the singing water," Kael said quietly. "The place where the people come when we need to remember why we survive." Alara could hear it now, the sound of the waterfall, but not just falling water. The acoustics of the canyon walls caught and amplified and bent the sound until it did sound like singing, low notes and high notes, rhythms and harmonics, a constant living music. "My sister loved this place," Kael continued. "She would come here when things were hard, when the world felt too heavy. She said the water sang away the bad weight, let her carry only what mattered." "Why did you bring me here?" Kael looked at her directly. "Because you carry heavy weight. I see it. Everyone sees it. and I cannot take it from you. That is not possible. But maybe the water can help you carry it different. Better. Elara felt tears building and fought them down. I don't know how to let go of it, she said. I don't know who I am without it. Then maybe you find out. Here, with the singing water. He gestured toward the pool. This is a sacred place for my people. But I give you permission to use it, to sit with it, to let it sing to you. He walked back toward the canyon entrance, leading the horses. You are leaving? Elara called. Yes. This is not my time here. It is yours. Take as long as you need. I wait at entrance. Then he was gone, and Elara was alone with the singing water. She stood there for a long time, just listening. The sound filled everything, filled the valley, filled her ears, filled the spaces in her chest that had been empty for so long she'd forgotten they existed. Then she walked to the pool's edge and sat down. The water was so clear it looked like air with weight. She could see every stone on the bottom, every plant growing around the edges, every small fish investigating the shadows. She thought about Kael's sister, about the women who'd been taken and broken, about the ones who'd survived and the ones who hadn't. She thought about herself, about the girl she'd been before her father sold her, about the woman she'd become under Boone's ownership, about who she might be now, here, in this impossible valley with water that sang. Without really deciding to, she started to cry. Not delicate tears, not quiet grief. She cried like something was breaking open inside her, like all the rage and fear and shame she'd been carrying were pouring out through her eyes. She cried for the girl who'd been traded for grain. She cried for the years she'd spent thinking she deserved it. She cried for the scar that had become her identity. She cried for the life she'd never have and the life she might be building. She cried until she was empty. Then she sat in the silence. Not quite silence, never silence here. The water kept singing and felt lighter than she had in years. Eventually, she stood and walked back through the canyon to where Kael waited with the horses. He looked at her face, red and swollen from crying, and nodded like this was exactly what he'd expected. Better? He asked. I don't know yet, Elara said honestly, but different. Different is a start. They rode back in comfortable silence, the sun dropping toward the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and shadow. When they reached the village, Naya was waiting. Good, she said, looking at Elara's face with approval. The singing water knows its work. Now you can really begin. Elara wanted to ask what that meant, what she was beginning, what came next, what this place expected from her, but she was too tired for answers. She went to the dwelling, ate the food Kael had set out, and fell asleep before dark. And for the first time since she could remember, she didn't dream of being traded. She dreamed of water, singing. The morning after the singing water, Elara woke to find Kael already gone, and the bone comb lying on the table next to a bowl of water and a clean cloth. She understood what he was offering without words. Her hand shook slightly as she picked up the comb. The symbols carved into it, birds or stars she still couldn't quite tell, caught the early light filtering through the window. She'd been here almost a month now, long enough that the village had started to feel less like a strange outpost and more like a place where she existed. Not belonged, not yet, but existed in a way that felt deliberate rather than accidental. She wet her hair and began working the comb through it, section by section, the way she'd seen the women do. Her hair had grown longer, healthier from regular washing and the food she'd been eating. It fell past her shoulders now, thick and dark. When she finished combing, she sat there holding the strands in her hands, uncertain. The door opened and Naya walked in without knocking, as was her habit. So, she said, looking at Elara's loose hair, you decide yet? Decide what? If you braid or not braid. If you choose the people's way or keep yourself separate. Naya sat down across from her. This is not small thing. Braid means you accept, means you are one of us, with all the good and bad that brings. No braid means you are still guest, still temporary, both are fine, but you should know what you choose. Elara twisted a section of hair around her fingers. What if I don't know which I want? Then you wait until you know, but waiting is also a choice. Naya leaned forward. You want my advice? Yes. Stop thinking so much. You think and think and think like thinking will make answer appear. It will not. You already know what you want. Your head just has not caught up with your gut. My gut doesn't know anything, Naya laughed. Your gut knows everything. It is why you came to the singing water and cried. It is why you took off the bonnet. It is why you are still here when you could have run 3 times by now. Your gut knows. Your head is just scared of what it knows. She stood and walked to the door, then paused. Kael will braid for you if you ask. It is traditional. The one who brought you here makes the first braid. But you can also do it yourself, or ask one of the women, or not do it at all. She shrugged. Like I said, all choices are fine, but make one instead of sitting in the middle forever. The middle is the most uncomfortable place to live. She left. Alara sat alone with her hair and the comb and the weight of a decision that felt bigger than it should. She thought about running, about taking Maka, or any horse they weren't guarded closely, and heading somewhere else, somewhere she could disappear into. She'd done it before, disappeared. She was good at it, but the thought felt hollow now. Empty, like putting on clothes that used to fit, and finding they no longer matched the shape of her body. She braided her hair herself. Nothing fancy, just a simple plait that hung down her back. She used a leather cord she found in one of the baskets to tie the end. When Kael returned that evening, he looked at the braid but didn't comment, just nodded once, the way he did when something met his approval. You did it yourself, he said eventually. Yes. Good. Better to claim yourself than have someone else claim you. And that was all he said about it. But the next morning, when the women gathered for work, Wakia looked at Alara's braided hair and grunted something that might have been approval. Seti squealed and hugged her, chattering excitedly in a mix of languages. Even the women who'd kept their distance before nodded at her differently, not with the polite acknowledgement given to outsiders, but with the casual recognition of someone who belonged to the same world they did. It was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. 3 days later, riders came from the east. Alara was working in the garden. Her hands had finally stopped blistering, the calluses earning Wakia's grudging approval, when she heard the commotion. Horses, male voices, the kind of disruption that made the whole village go still and watchful. She looked up, and her blood turned to ice water. Boone Carver sat astride a dark bay gelding at the canyon entrance, flanked by 2 men she recognized from his household. Behind them, 3 more riders waited. Mercenaries, probably, hired muscle that Boone liked to collect when he wanted to make a point. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to disappear into one of the dwellings and wait until he left. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the center of the village where the men were gathering. Kael was already there, along with Chaitin and several other warriors. The white-haired elder, Dakota, she'd learned his name was, stood slightly forward, his posture relaxed but alert. Boone dismounted with the kind of casual arrogance that suggested he thought he owned whatever space he occupied. His eyes scanned the village, cataloging, assessing, until they landed on Alara. His smile made her skin crawl. Well now, he said, his drawl thick as summer honey. There she is. Was starting to think maybe you folks had used her up and tossed her already. Dakota said something in his language. One of the younger men translated into English. What is your business here? My business, Boone said, still looking at Alara, is retrieving my property. See, there was a misunderstanding a few weeks back. A trade that wasn't quite proper. And I'm here to make things right. The trade was proper, Kael said. His voice was level, but something in it made Boone's smile falter slightly. Goods exchanged, terms met. She belongs to no one now. That's where you're wrong, friend. See, Alara here, he gestured at her like she was a horse he was describing. She's got debts, her daddy's debts, passed down proper and legal. And those debts mean she's obligated to work them off, which she was doing until you people interfered with a lawful arrangement. There is no law here except ours, Dakota said through his translator, and our law says a person cannot be owned. Well, that's a nice philosophy and all, but it don't change facts. Boone reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Got documentation right here, all proper, all legal by territorial standards. She owes, and I'm here to collect. Alara's throat had gone dry. She knew that paper, had seen it enough times. Her father's mark at the bottom, selling her labor to pay for debts he'd racked up at Boone's store. Legally binding, a lawyer had told her once. Nothing she could do about it. Kyle looked at her. Just a glance. Quick. But she could read the question in it. What do you want to do? And suddenly Alara was tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid of a man who'd convinced her she was worth less than the paper she was written on. She stepped forward. Every eye in the village turned to her. Boone's smile widened. There's my girl, he said. Knew you'd see sense. Come on now, get your things. We'll sort this all out back home. No, Alara said. The smile froze. What? I said no. Her voice shook, but she pushed through it. I'm not going anywhere with you. Now, Alara, don't be foolish. These people can't protect you from the law. That paper says my father sold my labor to pay his debts. But my father's dead. She'd learned this from a trader who'd passed through 2 weeks ago, mentioned in passing that old drunk Vance had finally choked on his own vomit. She'd felt nothing hearing it. Dead men don't have debts. Their obligations die with them. Boone's jaw tightened. That ain't how it works. Then how does it work? Explain it to me. Explain how you own a person after the debt holder is dead. Explain the law that says I'm your property forever. You're twisting things. I'm stating facts. She took another step forward. Her legs felt like water, but she kept moving. You want to talk about facts? Fact is, you never paid my father fairly. Fact is, you kept adding interest and charges until the debt could never be paid off. Fact is, you used that paper to keep me working for nothing because it was easier than paying real wages. That's a damned lie. Is it? Alara pulled down the collar of her shirt, exposing the scar tissue on her shoulder where Boone had burned her with a poker when she'd tried to leave the first time. Is this a lie? Or this? She turned her face fully toward him, letting him see the scar that ran down her cheek. You did this. When I talked back. When I dared to suggest that maybe the debt had been paid twice over. You took a knife, and you carved me like I was nothing. The village had gone absolutely silent. Boone's face flushed red. You fell. You were clumsy, and I didn't fall. You held me down, and you cut me, and you told me that's what happens to women who forget their place. Her voice was steady now, clear. And then you told everyone I'd had an accident. And I let you because I was scared, because I thought I had no choice, because I believed I was worth exactly what you said I was worth. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the veins in his eyes, the tobacco stains on his teeth. But I don't believe that anymore, she said quietly. So you can wave that paper all you want. You can threaten and bluster and try to convince these people that you have some kind of claim on me. But the truth is simple. I don't belong to you. I never did. You just convinced me I did, and I was young enough and scared enough to believe it. Boone's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Before Alara could blink, Kyle was between them. He hadn't drawn a weapon, hadn't even shifted his stance aggressively. He just stood there, solid as the canyon walls, and somehow that was more threatening than any gun. You should leave now, Kyle said. This isn't your fight, savage. Yes, Kyle said. It is. She is one of us now. You threaten her. You threaten the people. You draw that weapon. You die where you stand. It wasn't a boast, just a statement of fact, delivered in that same level tone Kyle used for everything. Boone looked at Kyle, at the warriors who'd silently moved to flank him, at Alara, standing there with her scar exposed and her braid hanging down her back and her chin up. His hand moved away from the gun. You're making a mistake, he said to Alara. You think these people care about you? You think they'll keep you around when they figure out what you really are? A broken-down whore with a ruined face who ain't good for much except heavy lifting? The words should have hurt, should have cut deep, should have made her want to curl up and disappear. Instead, Alara felt something like pity. I think, she said slowly, that you're scared. Scared that if I can walk away, other people might too. Might realize that your power only works if they believe in it. And I don't believe in it anymore. Boone stared at her for a long moment. Then he spat in the dust at her feet. You'll regret this, he said. When winter comes and you're starving, when these people realize what a burden you are, you'll come crawling back. And I won't take you. You'll have nowhere to go. Then I'll have nowhere to go, Alara said. But I still won't be yours. He mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. His men followed suit, except for one, a younger guy who'd sometimes snuck her extra food when Boone wasn't looking. He met her eyes briefly, nodded once, then turned his horse away. Boone looked down at her from the saddle. This isn't over. Yes, Kael said. It is. You come back here, you don't leave. Boone yanked his horse's head around and kicked it into a canter. His men followed, and within minutes they were gone, dust settling back onto the canyon floor like nothing had happened. Alara stood there, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Then her knees gave out. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground, his hands steady on her arms. Easy, he murmured. Easy. Breathe. She tried. Her lungs felt like they'd forgotten how to work. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Breathe, Kyle said again. In, out, slow. She focused on his voice, on the feel of his hands, on the solid fact of the ground beneath her feet. Slowly, the shaking subsided. When she could finally stand on her own, she found the entire village watching her. Not with pity, not with judgment, just watching. Dakota stepped forward and said something in his language. The translator spoke. You stood well, spoke truth without fear. That is the mark of strength. Alara wanted to laugh, wanted to tell them she'd been terrified every second, wanted to explain that she'd nearly run, nearly hid, nearly let Boone take her just to avoid the confrontation. But Wakia was nodding, and Seti was smiling, and Naya was looking at her with something that might have been respect. Come, Naya said, taking her arm. You need to sit, and probably food. Confrontation always makes me hungry. She led Alara away from the gathering crowd, back toward the dwelling. Kael followed at a distance, not hovering, but present. Inside, Naya pushed Alara onto the sleeping platform and brought her water. Drink, she commanded. Then tell me, how do you feel? Terrified, Alara said honestly. Like I might throw up. Like I can't believe I just did that. Good. Fear means you are alive. Means you risk something real. Naya sat down across from her. You know what happens now? He comes back with more men? Maybe. Probably not. Men like that, they are all noise and threat until someone calls them on it. Then they find easier targets. She paused. But if he does come back, we will be ready. The people protect their own. I'm not. Yes, you are. You braided your hair. You stood with us against him. You chose. Now you are one of us, with all that means. Good and bad. Alara pressed her hands against her face, feeling the scar tissue under her palms. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be this. Be someone who stands up, someone who fights back. I spent so long just surviving, just getting through each day. I don't know how to be anything else. Naya reached over and pulled Alara's hands away from her face. You just did it, she said simply. That man came here thinking you would fold, thinking one look at him would make you remember your place, and instead you stood there and told him the truth. You think that was surviving? I don't know what it was. It was living, finally. Naya stood. Now rest. Tonight we feast, not for celebration, but for acknowledgement. You have passed a test, whether you meant to or not. The people will want to honor that. I don't want to be honored. I just want. What you want and what you get are often different things. Learn to accept both. Naya walked to the door, then looked back. Also, you should know, Kael is proud of you. He will not say it because he does not say things like that. But I see it. Everyone sees it. She left before Alara could respond. Alara lay back on the platform and stared at the ceiling. Her whole body ached like she'd been in a physical fight. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation, finding all the places she'd stumbled over words, all the moments she'd almost broken. But she hadn't broken. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She'd stood there and faced him and told the truth, and she hadn't broken. When Kael came in later, he didn't ask if she was okay, didn't try to comfort her or tell her she'd done well. He just sat down at the table and began preparing food, moving through the familiar motions, giving her space to exist without expectation. After a while, Ilara sat up. Kael? Yes? Thank you for standing with me. He glanced at her. I did not stand with you. I stood behind you. You stood with yourself. That is more important. I almost ran. But you did not. That is what matters. What if he comes back? Kael set down the knife he'd been using to cut vegetables. Then we deal with it. Together. That is what community means. Shared burden, shared protection. You do not face things alone anymore unless you choose to. I'm not used to that. I know. You will learn. He went back to preparing food. Tonight, the people will want to hear your story. The true one. Not the version Boone told, but yours. You do not have to tell it if you are not ready, but if you choose to, they will listen. They will witness. That is our way. Stories shared become less heavy. Ilara thought about that. About telling the whole truth to a group of people who barely knew her. About exposing all the ugly parts, all the shame, all the years of believing she deserved what happened. What if they judge me? They might. People judge. But judgment from people who matter is different than judgment from people who want to control you. Our judgment comes from wanting to understand, not wanting to own. That evening, the village gathered around the central fire. Someone had cooked something that smelled incredible. Roasted meat and root vegetables and bread that came out of the clay oven still steaming. People filled their bowls and found places to sit, the usual comfortable chaos of a community meal. But tonight felt different, more formal, more weighted. Dakota stood and spoke in his language. The translator, a middle-aged man named Matto, translated, "We gather to witness truth, to hear story, to add it to the stories of the people so it is not forgotten. Ilara Vance, you are invited to speak, to tell us your path if you choose." Every eye turned to her. Ilara's throat closed up. She looked at Kael, who nodded slightly. At Naya, who made a small encouraging gesture. At Wakia, whose weathered face showed nothing but patient attention. She stood. Her legs shook, but she stayed upright. "I don't know how to tell this," she started. "I've never told it before. Not all of it." "Begin where you need to begin," Dakota said through Matto. "The path will show itself." So Ilara told them. She told them about her father, who drank more than he farmed and blamed his children for every hardship. About her mother, who died when Ilara was 10 and left her to raise her younger siblings. About the drought year when the crops failed and her father sold everything he could, including his daughter. She told them about Boone, about the contract that seemed reasonable at first, work off the debt, earn her freedom, about how the debt never shrank, only grew, about the poker, about the knife, about the years of being told she was worthless, broken, a burden that should be grateful for any attention. She told them about the day she was traded for cornmeal, about standing in that yard thinking this was finally it. This was the end. This was as low as she could go. And then she told them about Kael, about the braid, about the singing water, about learning to work without fear, about the moment she realized she could choose differently. Her voice cracked several times. Tears ran down her face, and she didn't wipe them away. But she kept talking, kept pushing through, because once she started, it all needed to come out. When she finished, silence fell over the gathering. Then Dakota stood and spoke. Matto translated. "Your story is now our story. Your pain is witnessed. Your survival is honored. You are no longer alone with what you carry." One by one, people stood. They didn't applaud, didn't cheer, just stood in acknowledgement, bearing witness to what she'd shared. Wakia came forward and placed both hands on Ilara's shoulders. She said something in her language that Matto translated as strong heart, strong spirit, welcome, daughter. Seti hugged her, crying openly. "I knew you were brave," she whispered. "I knew it." Others came forward too, touching her shoulder, her hand, her arm. Small gestures of connection, of acceptance. When it was over and people began returning to their meals and conversations, Ilara felt hollowed out. Empty in a way that wasn't quite good or bad. Just different. Kael appeared beside her with a bowl of food. "Eat," he said. "Telling truth is hard work. You need to eat." She took the bowl but couldn't bring herself to lift the spoon. "I feel strange," she said. "Strange how?" "Lighter, but also scared. Like I gave away something important and now I don't know who I am without it. Kale sat down beside her. You gave away the weight, the shame, the belief that you deserved pain. Those things were never important. They were just heavy. They were all I knew. I know, but now you know something else. You know what it feels like to stand without them. That knowledge cannot be taken back. Alara finally took a bite of food, then another. Her body remembered it needed fuel even if her mind was still processing. They sat together in companionable silence while the fire burned and the village settled into evening rhythms around them. Kael? Alara said eventually. Yes? I think I'm ready now, for the braid, the real one, the one that means I'm choosing this. He looked at her for a long moment. You are certain? No, but I'm as certain as I can be, and Naya said the middle is the most uncomfortable place to live. So, yes, I'm ready. Kael stood and held out his hand. Come then, this is not done in public. This is private, between you and the person who makes the braid. She took his hand and let him lead her back to the dwelling. Inside, he lit extra lamps and gestured for her to sit. He brought the bone comb and a bowl of water and something that looked like oil in a small clay jar. This oil, he said, is made from sage and cedar. It is what we use for important braids, for ceremonies, for beginnings. He poured a small amount into his palm and worked it through her hair gently, section by section. His hands were careful, patient, treating her hair like it mattered. Then he began to braid. Not the simple plait she'd done herself. Something more complex, weaving sections over and under in a pattern she couldn't quite follow. His fingers moved with practiced certainty, and she realized he must have done this before, for his sister maybe, or other women in his life. This braid, he said as he worked, tells a story. 3 strands for 3 parts of life, past, present, future. They weave together because you cannot separate them. Who you were shapes who you will become. All connected, all part of the same path. Alara closed her eyes and focused on the gentle tugging on her scalp, the rhythm of his hands, the weight of her hair being transformed into something deliberate. The pattern I use, Kael continued, is called the walking braid. It means you are on a journey, not lost, not wandering, walking with purpose, even if you do not always know where the path leads. That feels accurate, Alara murmured. Yes, I thought it would. When he finished, he used a leather cord wrapped with small beads to secure the end. Then he walked around to face her. Look, he said, and held up a piece of polished metal that served as a mirror. Alara looked at her reflection. The braid hung thick and complex down her back, the pattern catching the lamplight. It looked strong, intentional, like something that had been made with care rather than just thrown together. It's beautiful, she said. It is yours. That is what makes it beautiful. Kael set down the mirror. Now you are truly one of the people. When others see this braid, they will know. They will understand what it means. What does it mean? That you chose yourself, that you walked a hard path and came through, that you are beginning something new. He paused. Also that you are under the people's protection. Anyone who harms you harms us all. Alara reached back and touched the braid carefully. I don't know how to thank you. You do not thank me. You live well. You honor what you survived by becoming who you are meant to be. That is enough. He stood and went to his sleeping area, giving her space. Alara lay down on the platform and touched the braid again, feeling its weight, its complexity, the care that had gone into making it. For the first time since she could remember, she felt like she belonged to herself. And that belonging felt like the most radical thing she'd ever experienced. The weeks that followed the braiding ceremony settled into a rhythm that felt almost dangerously normal. Alara woke with the village, worked with the women, ate communal meals, learned more of the language until she could hold basic conversations without Matto translating every word. Her hands grew stronger, her body adapted to the constant physical labor. The braid down her back became something she touched without thinking, a reminder that she'd chosen this life rather than had it chosen for her. But normal never lasted long. She should have known that. The smoke came on a morning that had started like any other. Alara was helping Wakia prepare hides when Chayton came running from the canyon's eastern ridge, shouting something that made every head in the village snap up. The word he kept repeating, Peta, peta, peta. She'd learned meant fire. People moved fast, not panicked, but with the kind of urgent efficiency that came from having dealt with this before. The men grabbed tools and weapons. The women started gathering children, organizing supplies, assessing what needed to be protected first. Kyle appeared beside Alara, already armed with an axe and what looked like wet cloth wrapped around his shoulders. Fire, he said unnecessarily, because she could smell it now. That acrid bite in the air that meant something was burning nearby. Big one, coming from the east with the wind. We have maybe an hour before it reaches the canyon. What do we do? Men fight it, try to turn it, slow it down. Women take children and elders to the caves on the west wall. Stone does not burn. You go with them. What about the village? We save what we can, lose what we must. He gripped her shoulder once. Go now. Help Naya organize the children. She will need extra hands. He was gone before she could argue. Alara found Naya already herding a group of small children toward a narrow path that led up the canyon wall. Seti was with her, carrying a baby on her hip and trying to keep 3 toddlers moving in the same direction. Good, you are here, Naya said when she saw Alara. Take these 4, she pointed at a cluster of children between 5 and 8 years old, and follow Seti. There are caves about halfway up. We have supplies there already. Water, food, blankets. Get them inside and keep them calm. Can you do this? Yes. Good. Go. Alara gathered the 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, all looking scared but trying to be brave, and followed Seti up the path. It was steep, narrow, barely wide enough for single file. Below, the village was controlled chaos. Men were wetting down roofs, creating fire breaks, moving animals to different corrals. Women were hauling baskets of food and medicine up toward the caves. The smoke was getting thicker. Alara could see it now, a dark wall advancing across the scrubland to the east. The fire behind it glowed orange, even in daylight. Do not look, Seti said sharply. Look at path. Watch your feet. Children follow what you do. If you are scared, they are more scared. Alara forced herself to focus on the path, on putting one foot in front of the other, on making sure the children behind her kept moving. The caves were exactly where Naya had said. A series of openings carved into the canyon wall by ancient water. Inside it was cool and dark and smelled like stone and earth. Other women were already there, organizing, setting up sleeping areas, calming frightened children. Wakia was directing everything with the same calm efficiency she brought to every task. Put children in back cave, she told Alara. Away from smoke. There is water there and food. Keep them busy, tell stories, teach games, anything to keep their minds occupied. Alara led her 4 charges deeper into the cave system. The baby Seti had been carrying started crying, and several of the other children joined in, their fear finally breaking through. Hey, Alara said, crouching down to their level. Who knows the story about the singing water? One of the girls, maybe 6 years old, with her hair in 2 neat braids, raised her hand timidly. I know it. Tell it to me. I love that story. The girl started talking in halting English mixed with her own language, telling a simplified version of the legend about water that sang away sadness. Other children gathered around to listen. Their crying gradually subsided into sniffles and then into attentive silence. Alara kept them talking, kept them distracted, kept them from thinking about the fire that was probably devouring their homes while they hid in stone. Hours crawled by. The smoke got worse before it got better, thick enough that it crept into the caves, making people cough and eyes water. Wakia soaked cloths in water and had everyone hold them over their faces. The air tasted like ash. Alara counted children compulsively. 4, 5, 6, 7. Over and over, making sure none had wandered off, none had panicked and run. Outside she could hear shouting. Couldn't make out words, just voices raised in effort or warning or coordination. Then, slowly the smoke began to thin. The shouting changed tenor, less urgent, more exhausted. Wakia went to the cave entrance and called down to someone below. A conversation Alara couldn't hear. Then Wakia turned back to the group. Fire is turned, she announced. Went north, away from canyon. Men are making sure it stays turned. We wait here until they say it is safe. Relief rippled through the caves. Children started crying again, but different crying, release rather than fear. Women hugged each other. Someone started singing, low and rhythmic, and others joined in. Alara sat down hard against the cave wall, suddenly shaking. She hadn't let herself be scared while the children needed her calm. Now that it was over, her body was making up for lost time. Seti sat down beside her. "You did good," she said. "Children listened to you. That is important skill." "I was terrified the whole time." "So was I. So was everyone. But we did it anyway. That is what matters." They sat together in the dimness, waiting for permission to go back down. When it finally came, Kael's voice calling up that the canyon was safe, Alara's legs had gone stiff from sitting. She helped gather the children, made sure everyone was accounted for, and joined the slow procession back down the path. The village looked different. Not destroyed, the fire had been turned before it reached the canyon proper, but changed. Scorch marks blackened the eastern cliff face. Several of the outlying structures had caught sparks and burned partially before being doused. The air still tasted like smoke, and everything was covered in a fine layer of ash. But the main village stood. The gardens were trampled and muddy from water that had been hauled and thrown, but intact. The corrals still held animals. They'd lost things. Alara could see people examining damage, salvaging what they could from burned structures, but they hadn't lost everything. The men were ash-covered and exhausted. Kael sat near the central fire pit with his head in his hands, breathing hard. Burn marks showed on his arms where embers had landed. Chaitin was being tended by one of the women for a gash across his shoulder where falling debris had caught him. Alara walked over to Kael and sat down beside him without saying anything. Just sat there, present. He looked up at her. His face was so covered in soot that only his eyes looked familiar. "Children?" he asked. "All safe. We kept them in the caves until Wakia said it was clear." He nodded and went back to staring at his hands. "You are hurt," Alara said, noticing the burns more clearly now. "Small hurts. Will heal. Let me clean them anyway." She fetched water and cloth and began cleaning the ash and debris from his arms. The burns weren't terrible, mostly first degree, some blistering, but they had to hurt. Kael sat still while she worked, not flinching even when she had to scrub at stuck ash. "It could have been worse," he said finally. "Could have lost everything, but the wind shifted. We were lucky." "Luck and a lot of hard work." "Yes. Both." He watched her wrap his arms with clean cloth. "You did well, with the children. Wakia told me. I just kept them distracted. That is the most important job. Children remember fear. Better to give them something else to remember." Around them, the village was beginning the work of recovery. People were assessing damage, organizing repairs, starting to cook food for everyone who'd been too busy fighting fire to eat. Naya appeared with bowls of something that might have been stew, and might have been just whatever had been thrown together in a hurry. She handed them to Kael and Alara without comment. "Eat," she said. "Then rest. Tomorrow we rebuild. Tonight, we just survive." Alara ate mechanically, too tired to taste anything. Beside her, Kael did the same. When they finished, he stood with a groan that suggested every muscle in his body hurt. "Come," he said. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." They walked back to the dwelling, mercifully untouched by the fire, and Alara was hit by a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her over. This space, this refuge, still standing, still safe. Inside, everything was covered in a thin layer of ash that had crept through the windows and door, but it was cosmetic damage, nothing structural. Kael looked at it and shook his head. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight, too tired." He lay down on his pile of blankets without even removing his ash-covered clothes, and was asleep within minutes. Alara cleaned herself up as best she could with the water they had, then lay down on the platform. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. She kept replaying the day, the smoke, the fear in the children's eyes, the sound of the fire roaring somewhere too close, the relief when Kael's voice had called up that it was safe. They could have lost everything today, could have lost people, could have lost the village itself. But they hadn't, and lying there in the ash-covered darkness, listening to Kael's steady breathing, Alara realized something that made her chest tight. She would have fought for this place. If the fire had come closer, if the men had needed more help, she would have fought for it. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Because somewhere in the last few months, this had stopped being the place she ended up and started being the place she chose. That terrified and comforted her in equal measure. The next weeks were consumed by rebuilding. The structures that had burned needed to be torn down and reconstructed. Gardens needed to be replanted. Tools and supplies that had been damaged needed to be repaired or replaced. Everyone worked from dawn until well past dark, driven by the urgency of repairing before weather changed. Alara found herself doing tasks she'd never imagined: hauling timber, mixing adobe, helping to rethatch roofs with dried grass. Her body ached constantly. The blisters she'd finally gotten rid of came back with a vengeance. But she worked alongside everyone else, because that's what you did in a community. When disaster struck, everyone contributed. Kael's burns healed slowly, the skin pink and tender. He tried to hide how much they hurt, but Alara caught him wincing when he thought no one was watching. She made him sit still one evening while she applied more of the salve Wakia had given her. "You are stubborn," she said, wrapping fresh cloth around his forearm. "I am fine." "You are hurt and pretending you are not hurt. That is different than fine." "It is not so bad." "Kael." She looked at him directly. "You can admit when things hurt. No one will think less of you." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Old habit. Be strong. Do not show weakness. My father taught me this." "Your father was wrong." That surprised a laugh out of him. "You speak very boldly about a man you never met." "I speak truth about a teaching that is wrong. Being strong does not mean pretending nothing hurts. It means carrying what hurts and still moving forward." Kael studied her face. "When did you become wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of people pretending pain does not exist. It exists. Pretending otherwise just makes it harder to heal." "Like your scar." "Yes, like my scar." Alara finished wrapping his arm. "I spent years hiding it, pretending it was not there, thinking if I covered it enough, it would somehow matter less. But it always mattered. It always hurt. I just convinced myself I could not acknowledge the hurt because that would make me weak. And now? Now I know the hurt was always there whether I acknowledged it or not, so I might as well be honest about it." Kael flexed his wrapped arm carefully. "You have changed since you came here." "Is that bad?" "No. It is good. You are becoming who you were meant to be before the world tried to tell you different." "I don't know who I was meant to be." "Then you find out. That is the point of living, discovering what shape you take when no one is forcing you into shapes you do not fit." Alara cleaned up the medical supplies, thinking about that, about shapes and fitting and becoming. "Kael," she said after a while. "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me space to find out." "I did not give you anything. You took it. That is yours." One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the fire, Alara was working on repairing one of the garden walls when she noticed a small group of children watching her. They'd been hovering for a while, whispering among themselves, clearly wanting something but too shy to ask. Finally, the oldest, a boy of maybe 9 named Tokala, stepped forward. "Alara?" he said in careful English. "Yes?" Can you teach us? English words?" Alara set down the stones she'd been stacking. "You want to learn English?" "Yes. Traders come, they speak English. Sometimes we need to understand, but only few people know good English. Maro teaches some, but he is busy with elder things." "You speak good English. You could teach?" The other children nodded eagerly. Alara looked at them, 5 children, ranging from maybe 7 to 11, all watching her with hope and anticipation. "I can teach you," she said, "but I do not know your language very well yet. So we learn together. I teach you English, you teach me your words. Fair trade?" Tokala's face split into a huge grin. Fair trade. That became Alara's new evening routine. After the day's work, she would gather the children who wanted to learn, and they would sit together near the fire. She would teach them English words and phrases, and they would teach her theirs: sky, haska, earth, maka, fire, peta, water, mini, family, tiospaya. More children started joining, then some adults who wanted to improve their English for trading purposes. What started as 5 students became 10, then 15. Wakia watched this development with approval. "You have found your work," she told Ilara one evening. "Not everyone is meant to scrape hides or grind corn. Some people are meant to pass knowledge. This is valuable work." "I am just teaching words." "No. You are building bridges between worlds. This is how people survive, learning to speak to each other, learning to understand. You do important thing." Seti started helping with the teaching, translating when Ilara struggled with complex concepts. Between the two of them, they created a kind of informal school that met every evening, unless work was too urgent to stop. Ilara found she loved it, loved watching understanding dawn on a child's face when they finally grasped a difficult pronunciation, loved the way language created connection, made the world a little less foreign. One evening, Tokala asked her, "Why is your English so good? You learn from traders." "No, I learned from my mother. She was educated, went to a real school when she was young. She taught me to read and write before she died." "You can write?" His eyes went huge. "Words on paper?" "Yes." "Can you teach us?" Ilara thought about it. They had paper, limited, precious, used sparingly, but they had charcoal for drawing, smooth stones, clay. "I can teach you," she said, "but first you need to know the letters. That takes time." "We have time," Tokala insisted. The other children chorused agreement. So Ilara started teaching them the alphabet, drawing letters in the dirt, having them practice on clay tablets that could be smoothed and reused. It was slow work, tedious, but the children approached it with the same seriousness they brought to learning anything practical. Kyle watched this from a distance, never interfering but clearly paying attention. One night, after the children had gone home, and Ilara was cleaning up the teaching area, he approached her. "You are building something here," he said. "Just teaching." "No, you are creating future. Children who can speak multiple languages, who can read, who can bridge different worlds, they will lead the people someday. You are shaping that leadership." Ilara hadn't thought about it that way. "I'm just passing on what I know." "That is exactly what I said. You are shaping future." He paused. "The elders have noticed. They want to make it official, make you a teacher of the people, give you that role formally." "I don't need a formal role." "It is not about need. It is about recognition, about the people saying this work matters, this person matters. You can refuse if you want, but you should know it is an honor, not given lightly." Ilara looked at the teaching circle, at the letters drawn in the dirt that would be swept away by morning wind and redrawn tomorrow. What would it mean, being a formal teacher? You would have say in decisions about children's education. You would be consulted on matters involving outside trade and communication. Your voice would carry weight in council. He smiled slightly. Also, you would get extra food rations because teaching is considered essential work. "I don't need extra food." Everyone says that. Everyone still takes it." Ilara laughed despite herself. "When do the elders want an answer?" "No rush, think about it. But know that they would not offer if they did not believe you worthy." That night, lying on her platform, Ilara thought about worthiness, about how far she'd come from the woman who'd been traded for cornmeal, about the children who looked at her with respect instead of disgust, about having a voice that carried weight, about belonging not just as someone who existed in this place, but as someone who contributed to its future. The next morning, she found Dakota near the central fire and told him yes. The ceremony was simple. The elders gathered, the community witnessed, and Dakota placed his hand on Ilara's head and spoke in his language. Matto translated, "We name you teacher. We trust you with our children's minds and our people's connections to the wider world. We honor your knowledge and your willingness to share it. You are no longer just Ilara Vance who came to us. You are Ilara Vance who builds bridges with words." People touched her shoulders as they passed, the same gesture of acknowledgement they'd given when she'd first told her story. But this felt different. This felt like being chosen for something instead of being accepted despite something. That afternoon, she was working in her teaching area when a rider came. Not a traitor, not a threat, just a young man from another village to the west carrying news. Fire had swept through their settlement. They needed help, supplies, medicine, temporary shelter while they rebuilt. Could the canyon people spare anything? The elders gathered to discuss. Alara listened from the edge of the circle, not quite part of the decision-making, but close enough to hear. "We just rebuilt from our own fire," one of the men was saying. "We do not have much to spare." "But they are our people," another argued. "Different village, same nation. We help." "We help with what? We barely have enough for ourselves." Back and forth they went, debating resources and obligations and practical realities. Finally, Dakota raised his hand for silence. "We will help," he said, "because that is who we are. We find a way. We always find a way." He looked around the circle. "Who will go? We need 3, maybe 4 people to take supplies and assess what they need most." Kyle stepped forward immediately. "I will go." Chayton joined him. "And I." Dakota nodded, then looked directly at Alara. "We should send someone who can communicate clearly, someone who speaks both languages well, someone who can assess what help they need beyond just physical supplies." Alara's heart jumped. He meant her. "I will go," she said, stepping into the circle properly for the first time. Naya volunteered as the 4th, and it was decided. They would leave the next morning with 2 pack horses carrying medicine, food, tools, and blankets. That night, Kyle found Alara packing her traveling supplies. "You do not have to go," he said. "The elders would understand if you chose to stay." "I know, but I want to go. I want to help." "It will be hard. We do not know what we will find there. Fire damage can be bad." "I have seen bad things before, Kyle. I can handle this." He sat down across from her. "I know you can. I just want to make sure you are going because you choose to, not because you think you should." "I choose to." Alara looked at him directly. "These are my people now. Their people are my people. That is how this works, right?" "Yes, that is how it works." "Then I choose to go help them." Kale nodded, satisfied. Then he pulled something from his pocket, the bone comb, the one he'd given her months ago. "Take this," he said. "Not for luck, just as a reminder, you are one of us. No matter where you go, no matter what you see, you belong to yourself and to the people. That does not change." Alara took the comb, feeling its familiar weight, the symbols carved into it that she now knew meant strength and journey and becoming. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me. Just come back safe." They left at dawn, riding east toward the neighboring village. The landscape still showed fire scars, blackened earth, charred trees, the smell of smoke still faint in the air. As they rode, Alara touched the braid hanging down her back, felt the bone comb secured in her pack, and thought about how strange it was that she was riding toward disaster to help people she'd never met, and how good it felt to finally be someone who could help. The neighboring village was worse than Alara had imagined. They arrived in late afternoon to find half the structures gone. Not damaged, just gone, reduced to ash and charred support beams that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. The people who remained moved through the wreckage with the exhausted efficiency of those who'd been working for days without real rest. Children sat in small clusters, too quiet, their faces smudged with soot. The few structures still standing were packed with families sheltering together, sometimes 10 or 12 people in spaces meant for 4. An older woman approached as they dismounted. She spoke in rapid sentences that Alara mostly understood. Gratitude for coming, apologies for the state of things, explanations about what they'd lost and what they'd managed to save. Kyle responded with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything, asking questions about immediate needs, assessing the situation with quick eyes. Alara helped unload the supplies while Naya began organizing the medicine and food distribution. Chayton went to work with the men who were trying to salvage usable timber from the burned structures. "Where do you need me?" Alara asked the older woman, whose name was Winona. Winona looked at her with tired eyes. "You speak both languages well?" "Well enough." "Good. We have 12 children who lost parents in the fire. They need someone to organize them, keep them together, keep them from wandering into dangerous areas. Can you do this?" Alara's chest tightened. Orphans. 12 of them. Children who'd lost everything in one terrible day. Yes, she said. I can do this. Winona led her to a partially burned structure that had been cleared and made safe. Inside, children of various ages huddled together, some crying quietly, some staring at nothing, some trying to comfort younger ones with shaking hands. Alara stood in the doorway and felt the weight of their loss like a physical thing. Then she stepped inside. Hello, she said in their language, the words still awkward in her mouth but clear enough. My name is Alara. I am from the Canyon Village. I am here to help. A girl of maybe 10 looked up at her. Can you bring our mothers back? The question hit like a fist to the stomach. No, Alara said, because lying to children about death served no one. I cannot bring them back, but I can make sure you are safe while your people rebuild. I can make sure you eat and sleep and have someone watching over you. That is what I can do. The girl nodded slowly, accepting this truth with the resilience that children somehow managed even in the worst circumstances. Alara spent the rest of the day organizing the children. She counted them, actually 12, ranging from about 4 to maybe 13. She learned their names, assessed who needed immediate medical attention for burns or injuries, figured out which ones needed to be kept close because they were too young or too traumatized to be left unsupervised. She found blankets and created sleeping areas. She organized what little food there was into portions that would stretch. She sat with the ones who cried and gave practical tasks to the ones who needed to feel useful. When night fell, she told them stories, the same ones she'd told the Canyon children during the fire, plus new ones she made up on the spot about brave children who survived impossible things. By the time they finally settled to sleep, Alara was running on fumes. She stepped outside to find Kyle waiting. How are they? He asked. Alive, scared, grieving. She sat down heavily beside him. 12 orphans, Kyle, 12. I know. What will happen to them? They will be absorbed into other families. That is our way. Children belong to the community, not just to parents. They will have new homes, new people to care for them. That does not make losing their first families hurt less. No, but it means they will not be alone in the hurt. He was quiet for a moment. You are good with them. Natural. Like you have done this before. I raised my younger siblings after my mother died. I was only 12, but I learned. You learn fast when you have to. Then you understand their fear. That will help. Alara pulled her knees to her chest. How long do we stay? 3 days, maybe 4. Enough to get them stable, to set up systems that will work after we leave. Then we must return. Our own village still needs work. 3 days. It felt simultaneously too long and not nearly enough. They sat in silence, watching the few remaining fires burn in the damaged village, listening to the sounds of people trying to create normalcy out of devastation. The next morning brought new challenges. 2 of the younger children had developed coughs during the night, probably from smoke inhalation, but Naya wanted to monitor them carefully. One of the older boys got into a fight with another child over blankets and had to be separated. A little girl kept asking for her mother despite being told repeatedly that her mother was gone, as if the information hadn't quite settled into permanent memory yet. Alara handled each crisis as it came, drawing on reserves of patience she hadn't known she possessed. Around midday, Winona approached her with a request. We need to have ceremony, she said, for the dead, for closure. But many of our ceremonial items burned. Your people, do you have sage, cedar, things for honoring the departed? Alara went to find Naya, who'd anticipated this need and packed accordingly. Of course we brought ceremony supplies, Naya said, pulling bundles of dried herbs from her pack. What kind of heartless people would we be if we did not? The ceremony happened at sunset. The entire village gathered, those who'd survived, those who'd come to help, and the 12 orphaned children who stood together holding hands. Winona led the prayers in a voice that shook but never broke. She named the dead one by one, speaking their deeds, their kindness, their place in the community's memory. Sage smoke curled into the darkening sky. People sang songs that Alara didn't know but felt in her bones. When it came time to speak for the children who'd lost parents, Alara found herself standing. She hadn't planned to speak, hadn't prepared anything. But looking at those 12 faces, she knew they needed someone to voice what they couldn't yet say themselves. "These children have lost people who cannot be replaced," she said in halting but clear language. "Lost mothers and fathers and siblings and grandparents. Lost the people who knew their favorite foods and their bad dreams and the songs that helped them sleep. Those people are gone and nothing will bring them back." She paused, making sure she had the words right. "But these children are still here, still breathing, still needing to eat and sleep and grow and learn and become who they are meant to become. And they cannot do that alone. So the people who remain must step forward, must be the ones who learn their favorite foods, who comfort their bad dreams, who sing them to sleep, not as replacements, as new family. Because that is what community means. When one family breaks, all families expand to hold the pieces." She sat down, heart hammering, not sure if she'd said the right thing. Winona looked at her with something like gratitude. Kael nodded approval. And the children stood a little straighter, held hands a little tighter, as if the promise of new family had given them something to hold on to. After the ceremony, families began approaching Alara, asking about specific children. Which ones needed special care? Which ones worked well together? Which ones had skills or interests that would fit certain households? She answered carefully, protective of these children she'd known for barely 2 days but already felt responsible for. By the end of the evening, homes had been found for all 12. The transitions would take time. Children couldn't just be moved and expected to adjust immediately, but the structure was there, the safety net. That night, Alara slept in the structure with the children one last time. In the morning, they would begin moving to their new families. Tonight, they needed consistency. Needed someone who'd been there yesterday to be there today. She lay awake listening to them breathe, thinking about family and loss and the strange ways people survived. Somewhere near dawn, she felt someone sit down beside her. "Kael, you should be sleeping," he said quietly. "So should you." "I was checking perimeter, making sure all is secure." He looked at the sleeping children. "Tomorrow we start back. Winona says they have what they need now to continue rebuilding." "These children, will they be okay?" "Some will, some will not. That is the truth of trauma. But they will have a chance. That is all anyone can give them." Alara thought about that, about chances and survival and the difference between the two. "Kael," she said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me come, for trusting me with this. I did not let you. You chose. But you are welcome." He stood and went back to his watch, leaving Alara alone with the sleeping children and the slowly lightening sky. The journey back to the canyon village took 2 days. They rode slowly, tired from the work they'd done, carrying the weight of what they'd witnessed. Naya was unusually quiet. Chayton kept sighing like he was trying to expel something stuck in his chest. Kael rode with his jaw tight, speaking only when necessary. Alara understood. Sometimes bearing witness to suffering took more energy than fighting off physical threats. The orphans' faces stayed with her, their grief, their resilience, their terrible young understanding that the world could take everything in one burning afternoon. When the canyon finally came into view, relief flooded through her. Home. The word came unbidden but accurate. This place with its stone walls and adobe structures and gardens and people who knew her name, this was home. They were greeted by what looked like the entire village. People crowded around asking questions, taking the horses, bringing food and water. Dakota approached with his measured elder's walk. "You returned safely," he said. "This is good. Tell us, how are our Western family?" Kael gave a brief report. Damage sustained, lives lost, supplies distributed, children placed. The facts, stripped of emotion. Dakota listened, nodding, then looked at Alara. "And you? What did you see?" Alara took a breath. "I saw people who lost everything still finding ways to care for each other. I saw children too young to carry such grief carrying it anyway. I saw a community that should have broken hold together because they had no other choice." She paused. "I saw us. What we could have been if the fire had reached us. What we might still face someday. And what did you learn? That survival is not enough. That we have to live in ways that make survival worth it. that we have to build things that matter even knowing they might burn. Dakota smiled, a rare expression on his usually stern face. Good answer. Teacher's answer. He raised his voice so others could hear. Our people went to help and came back having learned. This is how knowledge grows. This is how we become stronger. The crowd dispersed gradually, people returning to their tasks. Alara walked back to the dwelling she shared with Kael, ready to collapse into sleep. But when she entered, she found something had changed. The sleeping platform had been expanded. Not moved, Kael's blanket still lay near the wall, but enlarged, as if someone had anticipated she might want more space. New furs had been added. A small shelf near the platform now held her teaching supplies and the bone comb. Kyle came in behind her and saw her staring. Wakia did it, he said, while we were gone. She said you needed better space since you're official teacher now. I can ask her to change it back if— No, Alara said quickly. No, it's good, thank you. He nodded and went about his usual evening routine, checking weapons, mending something that had torn during travel, preparing food. Alara sat on the expanded platform and ran her hands over the new furs. Soft, carefully chosen. A gift not of charity, but of recognition. She was still sitting there when Kael brought her food. Eat, he said, then rest. Tomorrow, your students will have many questions about where you went. How do you know? Because that is what students do. They worry when teachers disappear, then demand explanations when they return. Alara ate slowly, thinking about her students, about Tokala and the others who'd been learning letters, about how much she'd missed that simple work of teaching words and watching understanding dawn. I think I want to teach them more than just English, she said suddenly. Kael looked up from his mending. More like what? Like reading and writing, yes, but also history, stories, ways of thinking about the world. I want to give them tools to understand not just our people, but other people's too, to navigate between worlds. That is ambitious. Is it too much? No, but it is big work, important work. You will need help. Will you help me? Kael set down his mending. I am warrior, not teacher. You taught me about the singing water, about braiding, about standing up and choosing. That's teaching. He considered this. I will help, but I do not know what to teach children. Teach them what you know, how to survive, how to be strong without being cruel, how to protect without controlling. She smiled slightly. How to give people space to become themselves. Those are hard lessons. The best ones usually are. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Then Kael went to his sleeping area and Alara lay down on her expanded platform. She was asleep before she could think about how strange and good it felt to be planning a future here. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Alara's teaching circle grew. She started holding sessions not just for children, but for adults who wanted to improve their English for trading, for women who wanted to learn reading, for anyone who was curious about bridging languages. Kael kept his promise and started teaching practical skills, tracking, basic survival, how to read weather signs. His sessions were quieter than Alara's, fewer students, but those who came were intensely focused. Sometimes their teaching circles overlapped. Alara would teach words and Kael would demonstrate the things those words described. Students would learn to write water and then learn to find water sources. Learn to write danger, and then learn to recognize dangerous plants or animals. It worked better than Alara had expected. One afternoon, she was teaching a group of mixed ages when a commotion rose from the canyon entrance. Not alarm exactly, but heightened attention. Riders were approaching. She recognized the tension that came with unknown visitors, that careful watchfulness that could shift to welcome or defense depending on who showed up. She dismissed her students and walked toward the gathering crowd. 3 riders. White men, but not traders. They wore clothes that suggested official business, clean, well-maintained, badges visible even from a distance. Territorial marshals. Alara's blood went cold. The lead marshal dismounted and spoke to Dakota through Matto's translation. They were looking for someone. A woman. Wanted for theft and abandonment of legal obligations. They were looking for her. Alara started to step back, to disappear into the crowd, but Kael's hand closed on her arm. "No," he said quietly. "No more hiding. You stand." "They'll take me back. They have nothing. Stand." Before she could argue, Kael was walking toward the marshals with her arm still gripped firmly in his hand, not dragging her, just ensuring she came with him. He stopped in front of the lead marshal and spoke in clear English. "You look for someone?" The marshal sized him up, noting the height, the weapons, the absolute lack of intimidation in his stance. "We're looking for a woman named Alara Vance, indentured servant who fled legal obligations to one Boone Carver. We have documentation of her debts and warrant for her return." "On what authority?" Kael asked. "Territorial law. Indentured servitude is legal and binding." "Not here. Here, our law. Our law says person cannot be owned." The marshal's jaw tightened. "With respect, your law doesn't supersede territorial jurisdiction. We have rights to You have rights to nothing on our land. This is sovereign territory. Your laws end at the canyon entrance." "That's not how—" Dakota stepped forward and spoke. Matto translated. "The marshal can present his case to our council, but he should know we do not recognize ownership of people. If this woman is here, she is here by choice. If she chooses to leave, she leaves. If she chooses to stay, no paper will take her." The lead marshal looked at his companions, clearly recalculating. They were outnumbered, in unfamiliar territory, facing people who were being polite but absolutely firm. "Can we at least speak to her? If she's here?" Dakota looked at Alara. "Do you wish to speak to them?" Every eye turned to her. The marshals, the people. Kael still holding her arm like an anchor. She could run, could stay silent, could let others handle this. But she'd done that before. She'd hidden and run and let other people define her worth. She stepped forward. "I'm Alara Vance," she said clearly. The lead marshal blinked, clearly not expecting her to present herself. "Ma'am, we have documentation that you owe substantial debt to—" "I know what the documentation says. It's based on my father's debts. My father is dead. His debts died with him. That's not how debt transfer works. The obligations were fraudulent from the start. Boone Carver kept adding interest and fees until the debt could never be paid. He used that paper to keep free labor. That's not legal servitude. That's slavery with extra steps." The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I understand you may feel— You understand nothing." Alara's voice was steady, clear. "You ride in here with your papers and your badges, thinking that makes you right. But those papers were written by men who profit from keeping people trapped. Those laws were made to protect men like Boone Carver, not people like me. The law is the law, and I'm done following laws that were never meant to protect me." She gestured at the village around her. "These people took me in when I was nothing. They gave me work, food, safety, respect. They made me part of their community not because I could serve them, but because they believe people have value beyond what they can produce. So you can take your warrant and your documentation and you can leave. I'm staying here." The lead marshal looked at Dakota. "You understand we could come back with more men. Make this official." "You could try," Dakota said through Matto. "But this canyon is easy to defend and hard to take, and territorial government has bigger problems than one woman who does not want to scrape hides for a man who burned her face with a knife. So you will go back and you will tell Boone Carver that Alara Vance is beyond his reach. And if he has problem with this, he can come here himself and face the people who protect her." The marshals looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. Finally, the lead marshal remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes," Kael said, "it is." They rode away without further argument. Silence fell over the village. Then, slowly, people began to move again. Back to their tasks. Back to their lives. As if nothing monumental had just happened. But Alara stood frozen, shaking, unable to quite believe she'd just openly defied territorial law and watched it ride away. Kael's hand was still on her arm. "Breathe," he said. She breathed. "They might come back." "Maybe. Probably not. Men like that pick battles they can win. This one is too hard. Too far from their power centers, too uncertain. He released her arm. You did well, spoke truth, did not back down. I was terrified. Good. Fear means you understood the risk. You did it anyway. That is courage. Wakia appeared with a cup of water. Drink, she commanded. Then back to work. Fear does not excuse laziness. It was so matter-of-fact, so absolutely normal that Alara started laughing. She drank the water and went back to her teaching circle, where students were waiting with wide eyes and dozens of questions. She answered them honestly. Yes, those were marshals. Yes, they wanted to take her. No, she was not going. Yes, she was scared. No, being scared did not mean giving up. The children absorbed this with the strange wisdom they sometimes possessed, then went back to practicing their letters as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. That night, Kael built the fire larger than usual and sat down across from Alara with an expression that suggested serious conversation was coming. You have choice to make, he said. What choice? You can stay here, live quiet, teach your students, exist in peace. That is one path. He paused. Or you can use your voice for more. There are other women like you, trapped in bad situations, told they have no choice, convinced they deserve their suffering. You know their language. You know their world. You could speak to them. Help them see different path. Alara's throat tightened. You want me to go back out there? To where Boone is? Where those marshals might still be looking? I want nothing. I am telling you what is possible. What you do with possibility is yours. That's dangerous. Yes, very dangerous. Also very important. But only if you choose it. If you do not choose it, that is fine too. You have earned your peace. You do not owe the world more than you have already given. Alara thought about the women she'd known, the ones who'd told her she was lucky to have work, even when that work broke her body and her spirit, the ones who'd looked at her scar and been grateful it wasn't them, the ones who were still trapped in situations like the one she'd escaped. I wouldn't even know where to start, she said. Start small. Trading posts, settlements, places where women gather. You tell your story. You show them that escape is possible, that they are worth more than what they have been told. What if they don't listen? Some will not. Some will. You cannot save everyone, but the ones you reach, they matter. Alara pulled her braid over her shoulder, ran her fingers down its length, felt the complexity of the pattern Kael had woven. I need to think about it. Good. Thinking is wise. Just do not think so long you convince yourself not to do what you already know you should do. He went to sleep, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the fire. She thought for 3 days. On the 4th day, she went to Dakota. I want to travel, she said, to trading posts and settlements, to speak to women who are trapped like I was. I want to teach them they have choices. Dakota listened, then nodded slowly. This is dangerous work. I know. You will need protection, someone to travel with you. I will take whoever volunteers. You will take Kael. He knows the territory. He knows how to keep you safe without keeping you silent. Dakota paused. But know this, if you do this work, you become symbol. You become the woman who escaped, who stands against the old ways. That brings attention, some good, some very bad. I understand. Do you? Because attention means targets, means men like Boone Carver will want to make example of you, means you cannot just disappear into quiet life anymore. Alara thought about the orphans she'd helped, about her students, about all the women whose faces she couldn't see but knew existed, trapped, suffering, convinced there was no other way. I understand, she said, and I choose it anyway. Dakota smiled. Then you have the people's blessing. Go, speak, plant seeds of change. But come back. Your students need you. This village needs you. I will come back. Good, because Wakia will be very angry if her best student disappears. An angry Wakia is terrifying. The preparations took 2 weeks. Kael mapped out safe routes, identified settlements where they could speak without immediate danger, arranged for supplies and backup if things went wrong. Alara prepared what she would say, practiced telling her story in ways that invited listening rather than defensive resistance, thought through questions women might ask. Naya helped her put together teaching materials, simple guides written in both English and the people's language, explaining legal rights women might not know they had, resources that might help. This work you do, Naya said as they worked, it will change things. Maybe not fast, maybe not easy, but ripples become waves given enough time. What if I'm not strong enough? You stood against Boone Carver. You faced territorial marshals. You taught orphaned children how to hope again. You are strong enough. On the morning they were set to leave, Ilara's students gathered to say goodbye. Tokala stepped forward with something wrapped in cloth. We made this. For you. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a journal, pages stitched together with leather cord, covered in a wooden binding that had been carved with symbols. Stars and birds and water and fire. Her story, rendered in simple images. So you can write down the women you help, Tokala said. So you remember. So we remember when you tell us later. Ilara's eyes burned. Thank you, all of you. Come back safe, he said, hugging her tight, and bring more stories for us to learn. I will. Kale was waiting with 2 horses and pack supplies. They mounted and rode toward the canyon entrance. At the threshold, Ilara looked back. The village spread below, stone and adobe and gardens and people going about their lives. Her life. Her home. Then she turned forward and rode out into the wider world. They traveled for 3 months. They visited trading posts and small settlements, anywhere people gathered. At each stop, Ilara would speak. Sometimes to groups, sometimes to individual women who pulled her aside with desperate questions. She told her story, not all of it, just enough to establish that she understood their situations. Then she told them what she'd learned, that debt servitude could be challenged, that contracts signed under duress weren't always legal, that they had value beyond their labor, that escape was possible. Some women listened with hungry eyes, some got angry, telling her she didn't understand their situations, that she was making things worse by giving false hope. Some thanked her and did nothing. Some disappeared in the night, and she never knew if they'd fled to freedom or been caught trying. Kyle stayed close, but not hovering. He watched for threats, intervened when men got aggressive about Ilara's message, gave her space to do her work. At night they'd camp, and Ilara would write in her journal. Names of women she'd met, stories she'd heard, small victories and heartbreaking defeats. This is harder than I thought it would be, she admitted one night. Good work usually is. Some of them look at me like I'm condemning them, like by suggesting they could leave, I'm saying they're weak for staying. That is their fear talking, not you. But what if I am making it worse? What if I give them hope and then they try to escape and get hurt? Kael poked at their small fire. You cannot control what people do with information. You can only give them the information and let them choose. Some will choose to stay. That is their right. Some will choose to leave. That is also their right. Your job is not to save them. Your job is to tell them they can save themselves. Ilara thought about that, about the difference between saving and informing. I wish I could do more. You're doing enough. Seeds take time to grow. They encountered Boone once, at a trading post 3 days' ride from the canyon. He saw them from across the yard and went still, his hand moving toward his weapon. Kael's hand moved faster, resting casually on his knife hilt. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Boone's face was harder than Ilara remembered, lined with anger and something that might have been fear. Then he turned and walked away. Ilara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He will not bother you again, Kael said. How do you know? Because he saw you standing here, free, speaking to people, making trouble for men like him. He saw that his power over you is gone, and men like that, once they know they have lost control, they move on to easier targets. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it true. By the time they returned to the canyon, autumn was settling in. The air had turned crisp and leaves were changing in the few trees that grew near water. The village greeted them with the casual warmth of people welcoming family home. No fanfare, no celebration, just acknowledgement that they'd left and now had returned. Ilara's students mobbed her with questions and stories about everything that had happened while she was gone. Wakia grunted approval at her safe return and immediately put her to work helping prepare for winter. Dakota asked for a full report, listening carefully, nodding at appropriate moments. That night, back in the dwelling she shared with Kael, Alara sat on her platform and opened her journal. 43 women. That's how many she'd spoken to directly. How many had taken her words and done something with them, she didn't know. Maybe 5. Maybe none. Maybe all of them in small ways that wouldn't be visible for years. But the seeds were planted. "You did good work," Kael said, cleaning his weapons by lamplight. "I don't know if I did anything." "You did. You gave them a different way to see themselves. That is everything." Alara set down the journal and lay back on her furs. Exhaustion pulled at her, the kind that came from months of intense emotional labor. "Kael?" she said into the dimness. "Yes?" "Thank you for going with me, for keeping me safe, for believing this was worth doing. You do not thank me for what should be normal. You always say that. Because it is always true." She smiled in the darkness. "I'm glad I'm home." "This is your home?" She thought about that, about what home meant, about belonging and choice and community. "Yes," she said, "this is my home." Winter came hard that year. Snow fell thick and heavy, sealing the canyon in white silence. Work slowed to essential tasks, tending animals, maintaining fires, preserving food. People gathered indoors more, telling stories, teaching skills, passing long, dark afternoons in shared warmth. Alara's teaching moved inside a larger structure that had been cleared for winter gatherings. Her students multiplied, children learning letters, adults improving language skills, everyone hungry for knowledge during the long months when outside work was limited. She taught reading and writing in English. Kael taught survival skills and practical crafts. Together they created something like a school, though nobody called it that. One especially cold afternoon, Alara was teaching a group of younger children when Dakota appeared in the doorway. "Alara Vance, see," he said formally. "The council requests your presence." Her heart jumped. Council requests were never casual. She dismissed her students and followed Dakota through the snow to the council dwelling, where the elders sat in a semicircle around a fire. "Sit," Dakota said. She sat. "We have been discussing your work," he began, "both here and in the outside settlements. The council agrees you have done valuable service for the people." Alara waited, knowing there was more. "We would like to make your position official, not just teacher, but voice. Someone who speaks for the people when we need communication with outside world. Someone who bridges understanding between our ways and their ways." He paused. "This would mean more travel, more danger, more responsibility, but also more authority to create change." What would change look like? Safe places for women fleeing bad situations, routes that could be traveled without fear, connections between communities who want to help. You would coordinate this, build it, make it real instead of just hope. Alara's mind raced. What Dakota was describing was enormous, a whole network dedicated to helping trapped women find freedom. "I cannot do that alone," she said. "You would not be alone. Kael has agreed to continue as your protection. Naya has agreed to help organize resources. Wakia will handle supplies. Others will contribute as needed. But you would lead it. You would be the face of it." "Why me?" "Because you lived it. Because you survived it. Because you can speak to these women in ways none of us can. Because you already planted seeds. Now we help them grow." Alara thought about the 43 women, about all the others she hadn't reached, about the ones still trapped, still suffering, still convinced there was no other way. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want to do it right. Not just helping women escape, but helping them rebuild, teaching them skills, giving them real choices, not just different cages. That is exactly what we hope for. And I want to mark it somehow, create a place, a sign that tells women this is where help exists, so they know where to go when they are ready." Dakota smiled. "What kind of sign?" Alara thought about it, about symbols and meaning and messages that needed to carry across different languages. "A marker," she said, "at the canyon entrance. Something carved. Words in multiple languages saying, 'Here, no one is owned. Here, all have choice. Here, women are safe.'" "We will make it," Dakota said. "You have the council's full support." The people's support. Do this work. Build this network. Save who can be saved. I will try. That is all any of us can do. Spring came slowly, melting snow revealing the world beneath. The marker was carved by the village's best stoneworkers. A large flat rock with words carved deep in English, Spanish, and the people's language. No woman is property here. All who seek freedom are welcome. They placed it at the canyon entrance where travelers would see it first thing. Within weeks, the first woman arrived. Alone, exhausted, running from a husband who'd beaten her for years. Naya took her in, fed her, helped her heal. Alara taught her to read. Wakia taught her hide work. After 2 months, she was strong enough to choose, stay or continue traveling to relatives in a distant settlement. She chose to stay. Others followed. Not a flood, but a steady trickle. Women fleeing bad situations, seeking the place they'd heard about where freedom was possible. The village expanded to accommodate them. New structures were built. New systems created for helping women transition from survival to living. Alara coordinated it all, traveling regularly to maintain connections with other communities who wanted to help, training people in how to recognize and assist women in danger, creating an underground network of safe houses and guides. It was exhausting, consuming, sometimes heartbreaking when women couldn't escape or chose not to try, but it was also the most important work she'd ever done. 2 years after the marker was placed, Alara stood at the canyon entrance, watching the sun set over the land beyond. Behind her, the village hummed with life. Children played, including several who'd come with fleeing mothers, now thriving in community care. Women worked together, some who'd been there for years, and some who'd arrived weeks ago, all finding their place. Her teaching circle had grown to include literacy, practical skills, legal knowledge, and self-defense. Women learned not just to escape, but to protect themselves, to understand their rights, to move through the world with confidence. Kael appeared beside her, silent as always. Thinking? He asked. Remembering. The woman I was when I came here, how small I felt, how certain I was that I deserved everything bad that happened to me. You were never small, just convinced you were. Same thing. No. One is truth, other is lie, someone taught you. Big difference. Alara smiled. You always have an answer. Not answer, just different way of seeing. He paused. You have built something good here, something that matters. We built it, all of us. Yes, but you started it. You were brave enough to imagine it could exist. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the day end and the night begin. I need to tell you something, Alara said eventually. I am listening. I've been offered a position, territorial government, the same government that sent marshals after me. They want someone to coordinate women's welfare across settlements, someone who understands the problems. Someone women trust. Kael went very still. And you want to take it? I don't know. It would mean more travel, more time away, more danger probably from men who don't like what I'm doing. But it would also mean resources, legal protection, the ability to help on a larger scale. What does your gut say? Alara thought about that, about what she wanted versus what she thought she should want. My gut says I can do both, keep my home here, keep teaching, keep building the network, but also use this new position to expand it, to make it official and funded and permanent. Then that is your answer. You make it sound simple. It is simple, complicated, but simple. You choose what serves the most people while keeping yourself whole. Everything else is details. Alara leaned against the marker they'd carved 2 years ago, feeling the words under her fingers. Will you come with me when I travel for the new position? If you want me. I want you. I want Naya and Wakia and everyone who's made this work. I want to bring our way of doing things to a larger world. Then we do it. Together. The stars were coming out now, scattered across the darkening sky like the seeds she'd been planting, small, distant, but undeniably there. Kael? Alara said softly. Yes? I never thought I'd have this. A home. A purpose. People who see me as more than my scar. I never thought I'd be someone who mattered. You always mattered. You just finally found people who could see it. She turned to face him. Thank you. For seeing it. For helping me see it. He reached out and very gently touched the braid that still hung down her back, thicker now, showing years of care and growth. You are not ash, he said, repeating the words the elders had spoken after the fire. You are the fire that stayed. And standing there at the threshold between the canyon and the wider world, between who she'd been and who she was becoming, Alara Vance knew it was true. She wasn't the woman who'd been traded for cornmeal anymore. She was the woman who'd stood, who'd chosen, who'd built something from the wreckage of her old life. She was the woman who'd refused to stay small. And tomorrow, she'd wake up and keep being that woman, keep doing the work, keep planting seeds that might take years to grow but would grow nonetheless. Because that's what survivors did. They survived. And then, if they were lucky and brave and stubborn enough, they lived.